Hey guys, tonight we begin a cozy exploration of a nearly forgotten domestic craft, the gentle art of candle dipping in 17th century homes. Picture families gathering by the hearth, melting tallow and beeswax, straining every imperfection through soft linen, and patiently building slender tapers drop by drop. If you truly enjoy this soft, soothing journey through time, please like and subscribe, and tell us your location and local time below to join our global community. Before we get started, dim your lights, flick on a fan, and settle into your favorite chair or bed. Feel the gentle anticipation as you prepare to trace ribbons of molten wax, hear the hush of dripping wax and crackle of ember, and drift along with each slow, measured dip. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first pale ribbon of sunrise has slipped over the cottage's low eaves, the hearth lies quiet and cool. Only the faintest glow of embers remains in the blackened brick recess, shrouded in the hush that precedes morning. A single lantern, its glass clouded with soot, hangs from an iron hook near the doorway, offering a timid pool of amber light. Beyond the doorway, the courtyard lies emptied of bustle, cocks have not yet claimed their crow, and the distant church bell is still silent. Inside, however, the household is already awake, drawn by the day's ancient calling, to fashion their own light. A soft scrape, almost imperceptible, breaks the silence as the baker's wife slides the clay andiron pan forward from its shelf beside the hearth. She carries it to the hearth's mouth, where she kneels on the flagstone floor. With gentle hands she uncovers the pan's lid, exposes the blackened surface, and gathers a handful of aged embers from the previous fire, embers that still cling to fragile warmth. She cradles them beneath a small birch log, lifting them closer to the hearth's low arch. The wood sighs and shifts, the coals ignite in a gentle spark, and at last a thin curl of gray smoke rises to meet the rafters. A second family member enters, carrying kindling, slivers of oak and ash, dried since last autumn. Each twig is placed with deliberation, fanned into a small teepee above the growing glow. The hearth accepts the offering, the coals flicker back to life, and the soft crackle of new flame begins. It is a ritual older than any of them can recall, to tend the hearth before the day can truly begin, and in this softly spoken chore there is a certain peace. As the hearth warms, the baker's wife rises and moves toward the dresser built into the far wall. There she finds the earthenware pots and iron tools that will fill the next hours. A low shelf holds 3 clay pots, 1 shallow basin for cooling dipped candles, 1 taller jar for melted wax, and a lipped bowl for measuring water. Each pot is mottled with soot, its sides stained by the passage of countless fires. She lifts them carefully, the soft thud of clay on wood sounding more resonant in the stillness. A leather-bound ladle, its handle worn smooth by years of use, is added to the collection, along with a small iron skimmer and a folded scrap of fine linen, the cloth that will later strain impurities from the molten wax. Silence still reigns, but in that silence the sounds of morning assert themselves, a distant cock's tentative call, a slow creak from the door's heavy plank, the measured breathing of those who work by habit before light. The hearth's flames grow, licking upward to lick the underside of a crudely fashioned iron trammel where the family's kettle will soon hang. In that rising warmth, the first kettle of water is stoked to a gentle simmer, water drawn from the cool spring outside, carried in a bucket and poured into a clay basin that waits on the flagstones. The basin is wide and shallow, smooth inside, its rim worn by centuries of hands. A hush falls as the children, robed in coarse linen shifts, file into the room to stand near the hearth. Their eyes are still heavy with sleep, but they share quiet nods and half-smiles with their mother. They understand what is required before breakfast, this ancient craft of candle-making. Each movement is unhurried, deliberate. No one speaks above a murmur, even the hearth seems to draw its breath in anticipation. The baker's wife steps back, surveying the small workshop she has assembled in the kitchen's corner. The fire is steady now, the kettle's noise a soft rolling whisper. She lifts the clay basin of spring water and sets it on a low stool beside the hearth. Tiny rivulets drip from its lip, nourishing the stones that cradle it. The basin's cool surface catches the hearthlight, throwing back a shifting pattern of pale reflections. With each drop, the sound is measured, drip, 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 a counterpoint to the crackle of flame. Outside, the world remains in gray half-light. A distant church bell, summoned by a lone bell ringer, tolls twice in slow succession. Each toll seems to echo across the thatched roofs and timbered walls, as though calling out to every household to begin the day's labor. Inside the kitchen, the bell's vibration stirs a momentary hush, the children pause to listen, the baker's wife rests her hand on the trammel, and the hearth crackles in response. She steps forward to unwrap a length of linen cloth, stretching it gently over a wooden frame carved with notches at either end. This frame will hold the wicks in measured tension once they have been spun and prepared. Fingers skilled by seasons of practice run along the cloth's fibers, testing its weave, noting its suppleness. The grain of the wood beneath her hands is smooth, polished by countless touchings. As she works, her mind drifts to the coming hours, sourcing the tallow and beeswax at first light, rendering and straining, the rhythmic dipping that shapes the slender candles which will bring warmth and guidance to the household after dusk. But for now, the hearth itself demands attention. A child steps forward, offering a fresh log to the baker's wife. She accepts it with a nod, places it gently among the glowing coals. The fire brightens, crimson tongues dancing on dark brick. Embers drift upward, disappearing into the chimney's throat, carrying with them the faint scent of birch and ash. The kettle's lip warms, and the simmer grows to a gentle boil, pale steam curls in lazy wisps, its fragrance a modest promise of the water's readiness. At her side, the child sets the long-handled iron skimmer and ladle on the hearth's edge. The tools rest on a thick iron bar, their shapes clear in the growing radiance. The baker's wife takes up the ladle, turns it over in her hands, feeling its balance, a reminder of every dip and skim to come. She closes her eyes briefly and inhales the blended scents, the faint honeyed trace of beeswax still lingering on the ladle's bowl, the clean coolness of spring water, and the warm, smoky note of the freshly kindled fire. From the corner, the eldest child produces a shallow clay bowl, its surface still damp from a final rinse at the well. Carefully, the baker's wife pours water into it, watching as the basin fills to the brim. The water glints silver against the dark stone, as if the moon itself had lent its light. In that basin, dipped candles will cool and harden, their layers of wax sealing around the wicks, and so the foundation is laid for the day's patient artistry. A moment of stillness, the fire crackles steadily, the kettle hums, the basin's water lies motionless. The household breathes as one, attuned to the gentle symphony of preparation. In these first minutes before the sun's ascent, there is no hurry, only the measured beat of tasks performed by memory and muscle, the delicate unfolding of a ritual passed down through generations. Beyond the hearth, the sky brightens imperceptibly. The lantern's glow diminishes in comparison to the growing hour. Soon, when the baker's wife and her children step beyond the threshold, they will find the storeroom and coop waiting with their stores of tallow and honeycomb. But here, in this quiet chamber of stone and timber, the day's promise is already alight, a hearth rekindled, tools arrayed, water at the ready. And with that, the first chapter of their candle-making dawn draws to its close, preparing them for the journey of wax and wick that will fill each hour until the evening's gentle glow finally emerges. At the smallest whisper of dawn, before the timbered walls have fully shed their night-dark hush, the baker's wife, call her Marian, slips quietly from the hearthlit kitchen to begin the day's first essential task, gathering the resinous wax and rendered fats that will, by evening's light, become candles. A pale glow seeps through the leaded glass of the low windows, lending the rafters soft definition. The embers stoked the night before lie cool beneath a fresh scattering of ashes, while a clay basin of spring water awaits the day's waxy harvest. 1. Stepping toward the storeroom. Marian draws her woolen shawl close about her shoulders and pads across the worn stones of the entryway. Each footfall is muffled by the rush mat that guards against early morning chill. Beyond the heavy oak door, the storeroom stands dark and hushed. Its walls, lined with barrels and crates, still hold the lingering musk of last season's harvest, dried herbs strung from rafters, skins of salted fish sealed in lye, and sacks of coarsely ground barley. A single candle stub, left burning by a forgetful child, clings to life in a wrought iron sconce. Marian lifts her hand to steady it as she crosses the threshold, careful not to send stray sparks dancing into the dusty air. Her breath puffs before her as she moves to the row of wooden hogsheads where the freshly rendered tallow sleeps, waiting. In heavy iron ladles and shallow stone bowls, the family has collected each scrap of dripping fat over weeks of cooking and roasting. Now it stands in chunky masses, pale and firm, ready to melt again when the hearth is coaxed back to flame. 2. Opening crates of honeycomb. Beside the tallow, stacked against a cobweb-laced beam, are shallow crates of honeycomb. Marian kneels and traces her fingers over the rough-hewn wood, running her hand along the iron bands that bind it. A distant crow calls its morning salute, and a low sunbeam flickers across the rough planks. With gentle effort, she lifts the lid and eases it aside. The lid grunts on its hinges, then settles with a soft sigh. Inside, the waxy honeycomb gleams like captured sunshine. Pale gold cells rest in irregular patterns, some puckered with honey, others empty and dry. Marian draws in a breath that stirs a stray curl at her nape. The cold air carries a faint honeyed sweetness, an echo of summer blossoms long past. She lifts the comb by the edges, each piece cool and pliant beneath her fingertips. Broken bits tumble softly onto earthenware plates set for this purpose. 3. Ladling tallow from wooden hogsheads. Rising, Marian crosses again to the hogsheads. The lids resist at first, then creak open to reveal dense layers of rendered fat. In the dim light, it is nearly white, flecked with darker sediment that settled while it cooled. She sets a broad wooden ladle beneath the surface, dips it in, and lifts. The tallow yields with a muted plop into the waiting bowl. The rich, heavy scent of pork and hearth lingers here, a reminder of last night's roasting over the embers. She pours the semi-solid fat onto a low table, where her daughter Grace stands, still half sleeping, a linen apron tucked at her waist. Grace watches the tallow slide into folds, then dips her fingers to pinch a small piece. It breaks cleanly between her thumb and forefinger. Marian nods, and together they ladle again and again, until the bowl swells with the pale harvest. 4. Sorting by color and texture. At the center workbench, Marian and Grace sit side by side. Between them lie two piles, one of honeycomb pieces, the other of tallow shards. With measured patience, they lift each fragment, comparing color and consistency. The beeswax, warmed ever so slightly by the touch of their hands, yields to gentle pressure. It feels almost sticky, slightly greasy, with the faintest sweet undernote. The tallow is chalkier, more brittle, and exudes a savory warmth. They sort through handfuls, setting aside darker clumps for secondary melting, while the clearest, fairest wax and the cleanest tallow pieces are reserved for the first, purest layers of candle. Each fragment is weighed in small bronze scales, another careful measure that ensures the candles will burn evenly. Every shift of metal, every whisper of wood, seems magnified in the still morning air. 5. The faint honeyed aroma. Above the low table, a single iron trammel holds a shallow pot of water, warm just enough that steam curls into the rafters. Marian pauses, closing her eyes to savor the mingling scents: musty straw from the storeroom, the residual smoke of last night's hearth, the subtle cloy of honey wax, and the hearty tang of rendered tallow. It is an aroma that tells the story of this home and its seasons: spring hives humming with bees, midwinter feasts around a roaring fire, and every quiet dawn in between when hands must gather sustenance for the next day's work. 6. Hauling supplies through the cool kitchen. With bowls heaped nearly to the brim, Marian and Grace rise and carry their burden back into the kitchen. Their footsteps echo in the empty corridor, and the small window panes dew themselves with cold. The hearth lies waiting, its stones cool but intact from last night's flame. Marian lays the bowls upon the wide hearthstone, then retrieves a length of linen cloth and a clean wooden frame from a pegs near the dresser. Grace spreads the cloth with care, smoothing each corner. The household cat, stirred by the quiet return of activity, pads forward to sniff at the bowls. Its whiskers twitch at the smell of honey and meat fat. Grace shoos it gently away, diverting its interest to a scrap of candle stub on the floor. The feline obliges, purring as it bats the wooden remnant aside. 7. A moment to gather strength. The world beyond the small windows has brightened now, and the first notes of a church bell drift across the yard. Marian, hands dusted with wax and tallow, pauses to steady her breathing. In that moment between harvesting and rendering, before the kettle warms and the hearth awakens, she feels the full weight of the day's labor. Soon, heat and liquid glow will transform these solid bowls into streams of golden wax. Soon, each thread of linen will be dipped and built up in spiral layers until candles stand lined upon the rack, ready to guide family and neighbors through the long dusk to come. For now, however, she allows herself one slow exhale. The quiet, the honeyed scent, the gentle light, all of it speaks of an ancient rhythm, gathering, preparing, shaping, sustaining. And as the bell's final chime fades, Marian looks to Grace and offers a faint, soft smile, ready to embark together upon the next chapter of their gentle craft. Thus, with arms full of tallow and beeswax, and hearts full of steady purpose, they stand on the threshold of the hearth's rebirth, welcoming the slow, reflective choreography of candlemaking that awaits them. The morning light, pale and diffused through the mullioned windows, falls softly upon the timbered floorboards, still cool from the night's hush. In the kitchen workshop, the air carries a faint trace of smoke from yesterday's hearth fire, mingling with the lingering sweetness of beeswax glimpsed in half-emptied honeycomb crates. Having gathered the tiers of tallow and lumps of golden wax at first light, the family now turns its attention to the heart of the candlemaking ritual, rekindling the workshop hearth and arranging each tool and vessel in its appointed place. The slow, measured motions of this everyday choreography set the tone for the hours to come, as hands move with quiet purpose to prepare a station both humble and essential. A slender wisp of smoke still lingers above the hearth as the matriarch, her hair pulled back beneath a linen coif, places fresh kindling on the cold hearth floor. She sweeps away the gray ash with a small iron brush, the bristles scraping softly against brick. Each stroke clears space for new embers, each sweep promises a blaze anew. A son kneels at her side, holding a pile of split oak sticks, their jagged ends catching the light like pale copper. With a gentle hand, she arranges the kindling in a crosshatch pattern, allowing air to circulate freely. Beyond the hearth, the children stand at quiet attention, watching the hearth's transformation as if it were a waking creature coming to life. When the kindling has settled, a spark from the hearth's embers takes flame. The log cracker snaps open, and with a small steel striker, the fire leaps into being. Soft crackles and gentle hisses greet the room, the wooden rafters echoing the sound like a distant heartbeat. The mother lets the fire grow gradually, coaxing it with light puffs of breath, shielding the embers with her cupped hands until tongues of flame dance confidently along each split stick. The warmth seeps outward, touching hands and cheeks, lending a brief flush to pale skin. Soon, the hearth's glow is steady, a muted orange glow that promises to hold a patient, even heat for the tasks ahead. As the hearth settles into its steady glow, the husband retrieves the shallow iron pan from the low shelf beside the hearth. Its heavy, curved sides bear the patina of many seasons, dark as driftwood in color yet smooth as river stones to the touch. Carefully, he hangs it on the adjustable trammel, lowering it until its base hovers just above the coals. With practiced precision, he nudges burning embers beneath it, ensuring that heat spreads evenly across the iron. The pan's broad surface will soon cradle the raw blocks of tallow and beeswax, melting them into a lustrous pool for candle dipping. To one side of the hearth mouth, the mother sets a sturdy kettle of spring water on the side trammel. Cold water had been drawn from the well before dawn and kept in a clay cistern to retain its coolness. Now the kettle's curved handle tilts on the iron bracket as she lowers it into place. Almost at once, tiny bubbles begin to form at the kettle's lip, sending a soft steam into the crisp morning air. That water will serve as a cooling bath for dipped wicks, imparting structure to each successive wax layer. The simmering kettle and the steady fire become inseparable companions, the two hearth vessels in a gentle duet of warmth and refreshment. Across the workbench, the children and their mother unroll a length of fine linen cloth, its threads spun from hemp grown in nearby fields. They stretch it taut across a simple wooden frame, the upright slipping into pre-cut notches until the cloth lies as smooth as a scribe's parchment. Under candlelight, these linen fibers will trap the smallest impurities, ensuring that each drop of wax passing through leaves behind any mote of grit or fleck of char. For now, the cloth glows faintly in the hearth's light, white as drift snow, lined with the promise of purity and keen attentiveness to detail. Beyond the cloth frame, slender iron hooks hang from another rack, each bent at a slight angle to cradle wicks as they rest between dips. The father measures out the spacing with a short, narrow stick, his thumb marking the width between hooks, then adjusts each one with a gentle tap of his mallet. The hooks form a miniature forest of metal prongs, ready to support the lengths of thread that will carry successive layers of wax. Nearby, a simple wooden rack stands at attention, horizontal slats resting on turned legs, offering space for dozens of candles to cure once shaped. Everything has a place and a purpose, their arrangement guided by years of repetition and affection for the familiar ritual to come. In the low corner of the room, near a small window that overlooks the garden, a clay basin awaits its share of running spring water. The mother ladles the chill water into its shallow depths, careful to keep it free from leaves or stray dust. This basin will catch any excess wax, softening and hardening on its surface before she collects it again for remelting or reuse. It is a quiet companion to the hearth, reflecting the dancing flames and the sturdy tools assembled above it, a silent witness to each careful dip. The ambient sounds of the workshop are at once hushed and alive. The fire crackles with contentment. The water in both kettle and basin murmurs its gentle songs. The iron pan, warming slowly, emits a faint metallic sigh as the heat spreads through its body. The linen frame creaks almost imperceptibly as the cloth settles into its wooden hold. Even the brick walls seem to breathe, their uneven surfaces catching glints of light that flicker and shift like distant memories. All of it conjoins into a soft symphony of preparation, an invitation to slow the breath and attune the senses to each subtle movement, each deliberate choice. With the hearth now fully prepared, the family steps back to survey their work. The iron pan balances over steady embers. The kettle hums at the side. The linen strainer stands poised. The racks and hooks wait patiently for their appointed threads and wax. A hush falls over the room, broken only by the father's soft instruction, "Soon, we shall begin to melt the wax. Gather close." It is not yet time for flame to take form, but the heart of the workshop pulses warmly, as if sensing the tasks that lie ahead. In this stillness, they share a quiet nod, a signal that all is ready. The tools and vessels, each worn with use, stand at attention, silent partners in a ritual as old as home itself. Beyond this moment, the family will embolden the wax to its fluid state, skim away its impurities, and draw out slender wicks in patient succession. Chapter 4 awaits them there, where the first soft hiss of melting beeswax and tallow will echo against stone and timber. But for now, they linger in anticipation, letting the hearth's glow settle into their bones and setting the workshop's quiet order in place. The foundation is laid, the stage is set, and the slow, gentle art of candle dipping is poised to begin. The morning light shifts gently through narrow windows as the family gathers at the hearth once more. Embers glow like soft rubies amid the blackened coals, and a gentle hush has settled over the timbered walls. In this quiet hour, attention turns to the blocks of wax and tallow that await transformation. The iron pan, darkened by years of repeated use, perches upon the trammel above the coals. With deliberate care, the baker's wife lifts each solid chunk and places it at the pan's center. A soft hiss rises as cold wax meets the warmth beneath, the first delicate note in a slow, rhythmic symphony of heat and melting. At that moment, time itself seems to breathe more slowly. The flame below dances, curled tongues of fire licking the pan's underside. Each block of tallow, creamy and opaque, slides in, its edges curling and melting into golden rivulets. Beeswax, a honeyed yellow, follows, its surface gleaming before yielding to the flame's coaxing. Children lean forward, their small faces lit by the glow, watching the transformation with quiet reverence. No words break the peace, only the soft hiss of solid turning liquid, and the faint crackle of wood as fresh kindling is nudged to maintain an even heat, mark the ritual's beginning. In less than a minute, the pool of wax swells and stirs. Tiny bubbles rise, gathering at the surface and bursting in a series of gentle pops. A thin bloom of foam appears, dotted here and there with flecks of bark or specks of dust that slipped through the storeroom door. Such impurities must be banished, for the goal is a clear, lustrous medium that will later yield candles of pure light. The baker's wife reaches for the long-handled ladle, its wooden shaft worn smooth by countless hands, and dips the shallow bowl beneath the surface. She schemes, pulling the dross away in thin, curling ribbons. The soft scrape of wood against the pan is swallowed immediately by the steady roar of the hearth. Each pass of the ladle reveals more clarity. Golden pools deepen, losing their murky fringe as foreign matter drifts to the edges. The family stands in attentive stillness, as though they were witnesses to a secret unveiled. The scent of beeswax, subtle, sweet, almost floral, mixes with the earthy aroma of rendered tallow. Breaths are drawn slowly, savored. In this moment, the hearth is more than a place of labor, it is a sanctuary where raw materials meet skillful patience. A child brushes a loose curl from her forehead, leaving a faint smudge of soot that is brushed away with equal gentleness. All the while, the hearth's fire is tended with care. A slender poker nudges a smoldering log back into the blaze. Darkened coals shift, releasing warmth that radiates outward, embracing every soul in the room. Too intense a flame, and the wax might scorch, turning dark and brittle; too weak, and the pool would congeal before impurities could be skimmed away. The baker's wife adjusts the trammel height by twirling its iron lever, tiny metallic clicks resonate each time the pan settles a fraction higher or lower above the coals. Invisible currents of heat settle into perfect harmony with the pan's metal and its golden contents. As the last vestiges of foam rise, the surface of the wax becomes glassy. It mirrors the firelight in lazy, undulating waves. A second skim, gentler than the first, lifts the final granules of host material. The children watch as each unwanted particle yields, floating away to the pan's rim. In that single, unhurried flick of the wrist, there is a teaching born of generations, to be patient, observant, and steadfast. Silence remains, punctuated only by the continuous whisper of melting and the rhythmic beat of the hearth's quiet chorus. At length, the mother nods, and the baker's son steps forward with a heavy ladle of his own. He draws a small portion of molten wax towards a waiting clay bowl nearby, designed to hold the next stage of their process. The liquid shifts from pan to bowl in a molten cascade. It lands with a soft plunk, rippling across the earthen surface. Steam curls skyward, carrying with it the mingled fragrance of wax and the faint, tangy note of iron from the pan. Then, in the water-filled basin at the hearth's edge, only a gentle hiss answers as stray tendrils of wax cool upon contact. This moment marks the closing of Chapter 4, and the threshold of the next. The molten wax, now purified, waits in its clay vessel to be strained through fine linen, to leave behind every remaining trace of debris. But here, in the hearth's warm glow, there is time to appreciate the quiet triumphs of daily life. Each golden droplet, each measured skim, each careful adjustment of fire temperature has brought them closer to candles that will cast steady light through the long evenings ahead. Before turning away, the mother reaches toward the pan once more, studying its emptied surface. There is an almost imperceptible smile in her eyes as she lowers the trammel and lets the coals glow unperturbed for a short rest. In this brief interval, the hearth is still, save for a few embers that glow like soft sparks of promise. Soon, the work will resume, straining, setting wicks, the rhythmic dipping ritual. But for now, the family lingers, held in the gentle hush of their own shared craft, their hearts and hands aligned with the patient heat that has rendered ordinary wax into golden potential. As the chapter closes, the fire's embers seem to murmur a gentle blessing over all gathered there. The world beyond those low walls may shift and change with the rising sun, but here, in this humble 17th century home, the age-old art of candlemaking continues, as slow and tender as a whispered lullaby. And in that calm, the promise of the clear, warm glow to come feels almost like hope made manifest. A soft light lingers in the kitchen as the family moves with accustomed quiet. The hearth's embers glow beneath the heavy iron pan where just moments ago blocks of tallow and beeswax yielded their golden warmth. Now, in this gentle lull between melting and molding, the household turns to a methodical, almost ceremonial task, straining the molten wax to reveal its purest clarity. You step close to the hearth, feeling the ambient heat pressing softly against your cheeks. The kettle of spring water on the side trammel simmers with a low murmur, and the wooden floorboards underfoot creak subtly as you shift your weight. A faint scent of beeswax, sweet, honeyed, almost floral, mingles with the richer, earthier fragrance of rendered tallow. Overhead, a narrow beam of pale daylight slips through the small window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the still air. On the worktable stands a shallow earthenware bowl set within a tripod of wrought iron. Above it is draped a square of finely woven linen, once part of a mother's best apron, now pressed into service as a filter. The cloth's fibers are taut, the edges pinned carefully to a wooden frame so that it forms a shallow funnel. Beneath, the bowl awaits the clear wax that will pool there, ready for the next stage of candle making. The cook, her linen sleeve rolled high, lifts the iron ladle. Its long handle is blackened from many hours near the fire, and the bowl of the spoon has been gently shaped by repeated use. With a steady hand, she dips it into the molten reservoir, scooping a measured volume of liquid. Flames flicker behind her, casting her silhouette tall on the whitewashed walls. In that silhouette, every movement, every lean of the body, every extension of the arm, seems rehearsed by habit and passed from mother to daughter through generations. As the ladle emerges, it carries the warm, glowing wax, thick, amber-hued, slightly opalescent at the edges. A thin line of foam clings to its rim, a memory of the impurities that settled to the pan's surface during rendering. The cook's other hand steadies the linen funnel. In one fluid gesture, she tips the ladle, and the wax flows out in a steady stream. There is a soft swish as the liquid meets linen. The fabric's weave catches the smallest fragments, bits of charred matter, tiny flecks of debris, even strands of stray dross that might clog a candle wick later. The molten wax fans outward in a pale ribbon, then curves downward through the cloth into the bowl below. Each drop lands with a quiet, rhythmic plink, like distant raindrops on a wooden roof. You listen, mesmerized, to that gentle percussion. In this moment, time seems to widen, the slow drip anchors your attention wholly to the present. Beside you, a child leans forward, eyes wide. "Mother, is that all we need to strain away?" she whispers. The cook pauses, offering a soft smile. "Only what would trouble our candles," she answers. "See how the cloth holds back what would burn unsteadily, grit, ash, any stubborn piece that slipped by before. Our goal is a wax so clean it burns true." She gestures with her free hand to the bowl filling beneath. The wax there is brighter, more translucent than what remains in the pan. It catches the daylight like a captured sunset. When the ladle is empty, she returns it to the hearth pan and retrieves a second, warmer ladle, reserved for the final pours. The first, she explains, will hold bits of skimmed dross until all are removed. A small pile grows at her feet, a mosaic of pale and dark fragments, nothing wasted but separated for potential re-rendering later. In this quiet work, every tool has its place. A wooden paddle stands leaned against the table, its flat face used earlier to stir the melting blocks. Now it rests, its handle bearing tiny rivulets of wax that have solidified in cooling streams. A metal skimmer, its mesh fine as netting, lies to one side. Its purpose, too, was to skim bigger lumps before the wax reached the linen filter. The kitchen feels like a sacred workshop, each implement honored for its service in turning raw fat and wax into the warm glow that will guide the family through long nights. The cook employs the final ladle, pouring more molten liquid through the cloth while the younger child warms a small, silver spoon at the wrought iron tripod. The spoon, held above the simmering water, grows lustrous in a mirror of steam. When it is ready, she dips its bowl into the filtered wax to test its firmness, gently touching the surface, then drawing the spoon away to note how the wax clings and coils from the edge. If the strands break too quickly, the wax is still too soft; if they are brittle, the wax has cooled too much. In this delicate dance between warmth and solidity lies the secret to a candle that will hold shape on the wick and burn at an even pace. Satisfied with the consistency, the cook nods and turns to fill 2 more bowls. One will hold the wax set aside for dipping the pre-soaked wicks, already threaded on the drying rack, the other will be reserved for trimming and smoothing once the candles are formed. Each container is named by purpose, and this clear wax is destined for the heart of the next ritual. Throughout this process, the household remains hushed. The crackle of the hearth, the swish of liquid through linen, the gentle hiss as stray wax droplets meet hot water in the cooling bowl, all these sounds weave into a soft symphony. One might think there is nothing grand here, no hammering of swords or pronouncements of kings, but in the quiet communion of hands and fire, an ordinary family preserves its own light. By their patient labor, night will be lit in warm amber tones, and children will read by candle glow, elders will tell stories, and lovers will whisper prayers before sleep. As the last drop of wax trickles through, the cook lifts the linen cloth from its frame. She shakes it lightly, letting lingering residue fall away, then peels it open to reveal a nearly transparent sheet where once the weave was opaque. She folds the cloth and hangs it on a peg by the hearth to dry, its fibers going on to catch dross in the next batch. The filtered bowl stands ready, its surface smooth as glass. From here, the wax will cool until it reaches the perfect working temperature for dipping, the moment when slow, measured layers will begin to accumulate upon each wick. In the lull that follows, you feel the full weight of what has been achieved. The glowing pool of wax represents hours of careful tending, a time-honored process that binds each family to countless generations who performed the same rite. And now, with the molten glow purified, the path is clear for the next steps, the preparation of wicks, the rhythmic dipping that shapes each candle, and the final trimming before the first flame is kindled. But for this quiet half-minute, all is still except for the gentle crackle of embers and the lingering warmth of clear, clean wax. You step back, taking in the scene, a hearth-focused atelier where light itself is crafted by humble hands. The work is simple, nearly meditative, each motion a small, deliberate brushstroke in a larger painting of domestic life. And as the filtered wax cools, you can almost hear the promise of illumination, the glow that will fill dusky rooms, the soft halo that will conjure comfort and calm long after the hearth has dimmed. Soon, the day's next chapter will unfold. But now, in this moment of filtered clarity, you rest in the steady breath of history's gentle rhythm, lulled by the memory of the molten glow flowing through linen like liquid light. A pale beam of sunlight, filtered through leaded panes, falls across the worn plank floorboards, bringing a soft warmth to the room where the family labors at their domestic craft. The air, still tinted by the gentle smoke of morning's renderings, carries a faint scent of beeswax and tallow, mingled with the earthy tang of hearth ash. Here, in this pause between the careful business of straining molten wax and the next chapter of wick making, the household gathers for a simple mid-morning repast. The hearth, having given its gentle heat to the simmering iron pan, now waits to be renewed. In this moment of quiet nourishment and hearth mending, time slows and the pulse of daily life falls into a measured rhythm. At the low oak table, rough-hewn from the forest's yield, rests a small wooden platter heaped with slices of dense rye bread. Each slice bears the faint imprint of the baker's paddle, its crust darkened to a deep russet by the wood-fired oven. With deliberate care, the mistress of the house lifts a slice and spreads a generous pat of fresh butter, churned only the day before, its pale gold softened by the room's mild warmth. The butter, streaked with rivulets of salt, melts slowly into the thick crumb, releasing a faint, creamy aroma. A small pat of honeycomb rests beside the platter, its honey jewels shimmering in the light. A child tears off a fragment and nibbles it, the sweet chew yielding a burst of syrupy richness that contrasts the bread's wholesome bitterness. As the family breaks bread together, their voices remain low, respectful of the hearth's lingering hush. The children murmur about the next tasks, twisting threads into wicks, stretching fibers on the simple frame, counting their mother's marked heartbeats as each wax layer is drawn. In the corners of their conversation, the memory of the morning's careful ladling and straining echoes in soft admiration. They speak in clear, gentle tones, mindful of the delicate cadence of work still to come. Outside, a thrush calls from the garden's edge, and a slow draft stirs the smoke from the hearth, sending it curling upward toward the blackened flue. When the final crumbs have been brushed from the table, the eldest son fetches a small metal pan and shovel from the sideboard. The hearth, now cool to the touch at its mouth, holds a fine pall of gray ash across its hearthstone. He kneels on the brick floor, his sleeve brushing the worn hearth lip, and begins to rake the ashes into the pan. Each sweep of the iron shovel yields a whisper of dust, a soft sigh as centuries of soot surrender to the tool's edge. The ash, so fine it slips through the metal grating, collects in gentle drifts. He works methodically from back to front, clearing enough space to kindle fresh embers. Occasionally, he pauses to tap the shovel's edge against the pan, sending a solar shower of pale motes into the low morning light. Meanwhile, at the hearth's side, the mistress sorts fresh kindling and seasoned logs on a clay trough. Thin lengths of split pine, their pale wood faintly fragrant with resin, lie beside broader slabs of oak and beech. She arranges them in tidy bundles, slender sticks for the spark to catch, larger staves to sustain a steady flame once it is born. Each piece is chosen by feel and weight, a subtle assessment of dryness gleaned from the wood's slight hollowness when tapped. The crackle of the incoming fuel, once placed to the renewed embers, will offer a vital warmth and a ready source of heat for the kettle and the dipping vats. Children drift in and out of the scene, drawn by the hush and the promise of glowing coals. One child leans close to the ash pan, watching the curate of courage in pale gray. The other stands by the kindling, reaching out to touch the smooth bark of a stub of beech. Their small hands and curious faces catch the dance of shifting light, the first stirring of flame that will soon leap to life. They chatter in soft tones, speculating on the afternoon's tasks. How many dips do you think for a full candle? Will the wax be firm enough to hold a perfect spiral? The questions come and go like gentle breezes, neither urgent nor demanding, merely part of the slow unfolding of their daily lesson in patient craft. Once the hearth is swept clean, the eldest daughter raises the wrought iron tongs and reaches into the glowing heart of the coals. She retrieves a handful of glowing embers and lays them atop the fresh kindling, taking care to position them at the base of the smallest sticks. A single, slender curl of paper, dipped earlier in wax and dried on a nail above the hearth, is laid across the embers. The paper, held at its unburned end, curls into a brief flare and then a steady flame. The mistress watches for the moment the tinder is secure, then gently bows her head, as though in silent thanks for the returning warmth. A soft exhalation travels around the group, and a renewed glow begins to radiate from the hearth's mouth, a quiet invitation to return to work. The kettle, long simmering on its iron trammel, gives a gentle sigh as the heat intensifies. Tiny bubbles rise to the surface of the water, and the room fills with a comforting hiss. The hush of breakfast and hearth mending stretches into a peaceful pause. Warmth washes across the back of chairs and strokes the necks of the gathered family, reminding them of the loyal service the hearth provides. The mistress retrieves a fresh cloth bound tightly with wax remnants and scours the iron pan that had held the morning's dross. The blackened sides of the vessel yield to brisk swipes, revealing a smoother surface ready to cradle the next ladle of wax. As the kettle's steam drifts upward and the hearth's coals settle into a bed of rose-tinted embers, the family gathers their tools once more. The wooden frame for wicks, the linen cloth strips, and the box of spun cotton lie in gentle readiness. The children stretch slim lengths of prepared linen between their small hands and inspect each for uniformity. Their mother gently checks each thread, humming a soft refrain that seems woven from the coal's flicker and the water's gentle simmer. The hearth's new glow casts shifting shadows across their faces, and the shadows seem to beckon them forward into the next chapter of their work. With the hearth mended, the meal concluded, and the tools at hand, the family stands on the threshold between rest and renewed labor. The midday rituals of candle dipping await, the gentle submersion of wicks into pools of molten wax, the hiss of cooling baths, the delicate layering of countless spirals. But in this moment, the simple act of sweeping ashes and kindling a fresh flame becomes an embodied reflection of the care and patience that underlie the art of candlemaking. The hearth, once swept clean, now burns with understated purpose, promising the gentle luminance to come. And as mother, father, and children settle into their places once more, the rhythm of hearth and hand resumes, slow, deliberate, and suffused with the warmth of home. A hush settles over the low-ceilinged kitchen as the mid-morning meal concludes and the family rises from the rough-hewn bench. The hearth's embers glow softly among the ashes, the iron kettle set aside, its remainder of water still warm to the touch. At this turning of the day, the time has come to fashion the heart of every candle, the wick itself. Before any wax may be melted again or dipped, these slender cords of thread must be measured, twisted, and bound with patient hands, for in the wick's evenness and strength lies the promise of a bright and steady flame come evening. 1. Gathering fibers in gentle preparation. The mother moves to a narrow chest by the plastered wall, lifting the lid with a soft creak. Inside rest neat bundles of flax thread, fine, off-white strands hand-spun from the linen grown in the garden plot, and smaller skeins of cotton rag, bleached pale by summer sun. She draws each bundle forth, draping them loosely on the worn tabletop near the glowing hearth. The children stand by in respectful silence, eager to learn, eyes following every motion. A faint papery rustle fills the air as linen meets cotton, fibers shifting one against another. Before any twisting may begin, the threads must be teased, a gentle coaxing to loosen compacted fibers and remove the faintest impurities. With fingertips whose calluses tell of daily labor, the mother plucks at the strands, separating any tiny knots or stray bits. She hums a soft, almost inaudible tune, each pluck and release a note in this quiet hymn to domestic craft. The flax fibers glimmer faintly in the hearthlight, each filament pale and strong, while the cotton offers a downier softness. Together, they will form the ideal wick, sturdy enough to draw up molten wax, yet pliant enough to bend without snapping. 2. Recombining threads, building strength with kind hands. Once loosened, the fibers are recombined. The mother lays 2 handfuls side by side, one of flax, the other of cotton. She folds them in half, holding the doubled ends between thumb and forefinger. With measured care, she aligns the tips so that neither protrudes unevenly. In this motion, one senses a choreography centuries old, repeated in kitchens across hamlets and villages. The weaving of life's light begins with these humble threads. The first twist is the most deliberate. Holding the upper ends firmly, she begins to rotate her right hand away from herself, allowing the strands to coil gently. The children lean in to watch the slim cord form, spiraling like a seashell's interior. Each twist echoes softly, cloth against cloth, thread against thread, an intimate percussion that invites the listener's breath to slow. When the coils have built sufficient tension, she folds the twisted length about midway, letting the 2 halves entwine further under their own inward pull. The result is a doubled cord, neither too loose nor overly taut, shimmering with delicate resilience. 3. Measuring and trimming with precise care. With a bundle of perhaps a dozen twisted wicks coiled neatly at her side, the mother reaches for small shears perched on the edge of the table. Their blades, sharpened many times over, gleam in the wavering light. One by one, she snips the coiled ends, producing lengths of uniform measure, each about a foot long, the standard size for the slender tapers to come. The small snick of metal on fiber is quiet, yet clearly heard in the still room, like a secret shared. Occasionally, she tests a length by draping it between 2 fingers, noting its resistance to stretching. Too flimsy, and the wick will succumb to the weight of wax, too stiff, and it may not draw up fuel evenly. A gentle tug reveals each cord's character. Satisfied, she lays it on a wooden beam that spans across 2 supports, a makeshift drafting frame, fashioned from leftover oak timbers. Here the wicks can rest, suspended by their very ends, to be compared once more for thickness and length. 4. Aligning wicks on the wooden beam. This beam, dark and seasoned by years of flame and smoke, holds the promise of transformation. The mother lifts each prepared wick and loops its end over the beam's edge, spacing them with deliberate precision. 2 inches between each, she judges by the width of her thumb. A soft tap with her knuckle tests their seating, the slender threads must neither slip nor bind. Once all 12 or more lengths drape in a row, they hang like cords on a lyre, waiting to be awakened by the molten wax. Beneath them, in the hearth's recess, the family has set a shallow pan to warm. Though the time for dipping lies yet a while ahead, the steady heat ensures the wax will be at ideal viscosity when the ritual begins. For now, the beam's profile, lined with patient wicks, signals completion of this chapter, raw fibers shaped into functional cords, poised to breathe light into the gathering dusk. 5. A quiet reflection on domestic ritual. As the final wick is adjusted, a hush descends, a moment to honor the care invested in these slender threads. This is no mere chore, but a gentle art passed through generations, to draw from common scrub and stalk a slender strand capable of guiding flame. The scent of linen and cotton mingles in the air with the faint remembrance of beeswax from earlier melting, an olfactory tapestry that ties the day's work together. Each wick represents the household's perseverance, their shared knowledge, and a promise of bright evenings to come. The mother steps back, brushing stray fibers from her simple linen skirt. The children, having watched with reverent attention, exchange shy glances. Soon, they will be entrusted with the next step, submerging these wicks into the amberlit bath, watching layers accrue in spiraled calm. But in this suspended hour, they linger at the threshold of transformation, each wick a slender wish for light. 6. Setting the stage for the next ritual. Behind the beam, the hearth flames glow lower now, coaxing warmth rather than fire. The well-used kettle is refilled with clear spring water, its stand adjusted to cradle the bowl that will catch wax drips. Nearby, a folded linen cloth awaits to cushion any stray bits of wax during future trimming. Tools, ladles, hooks, rods, stand in readiness. All is prepared for the gentle plunge of thread into wax, the hiss of cooling in water, and the building of shape, layer by patient layer. Thus ends the chapter of crafting, the forming of perfect wicks from humble fibers, each step measured, every motion humble yet profound. In the cool morning light filtering through leaded windows, the framed wicks hang steadfast, promising that when dusk returns, these slender cords shall draw forth molten gold and kindle the heart of home. The next chapter awaits, the dipping of these wicks, sealing them against smoke and erratic flame, forging by ritual the soft glow that will guide the family into night's tender embrace. In the quiet lull between the shaping of wicks and the grand ritual of their first dip, the household turns its attention to the subtle art of sealing. The morning's labors in Chapter 7 concluded with strands of linen and cotton twisted into firm cords, each wick teased, trimmed, and aligned upon a simple beam of wood. Now, as the late morning sunlight deepens the golden glow of the hearth, the family prepares to give each slender thread its protective envelope of molten wax. This stage, neither hurried nor showy, will determine how evenly the candles burn when dusk arrives. The wax bath is stoked to a gentle, even heat, and all eyes remain calm and focused on the pool of liquid light. A low fire, banked with small billets of oak and beech, warms the iron pan into a shallow basin of molten wax. The blend is familiar now, part rendered tallow, part beeswax rendered clear and lustrous, poured and strained through linen in the preceding hours. A soft plum hue ripples across its surface, shifting under the hearth's glow. The kettle of water that once served for cooling now simmers quietly nearby, but the focus lies on the wax, whose faint honeyed aroma rises in pale curls above the hearth's draught. Each family member, from the eldest matron to the youngest daughter, knows this moment well, and their movements around the workspace are measured and deliberate. First, the mistress of the house retrieves a single wick from the beam where it rested at its full length. She holds it by one end, fingers steady against the mild warmth of the wood. The other end, slender as a young reed, sways with a gravity all its own as it approaches the surface of the wax. A hush falls in the kitchen, only the crackle of the fire and the distant toll of the parish bell mark the passage of time. Then, in one graceful, unhurried motion, the wick is lowered until its very tip vanishes beneath the wax. For an instant, all that exists is the meeting of thread and liquid, the firm fiber disappearing into the molten glow. Immediately, the wax clings to the cord. It gathers in a halo of soft translucence, coating the strands in a thin, uniform sheath. The mistress pauses for a heartbeat, feeling with her fingertips the slight give where wax and fiber embrace. Then, ever so slowly, she draws the wick upward. It emerges glistening, as though newly born, each filament now bound in a protective cloak. Tiny rivulets cling along the length, like delicate roots drawn from a pond, before gravity pulls them downward. They fall away in droplet after droplet, each one shaped by the warmth of the pan and the coolness of the surrounding air. Soft, rhythmic plinks signal their release as they return to the molten pool, creating concentric ripples that fade into stillness. The child at the hearth edge watches those droplets with fascinated eyes. She sees them catch the firelight and remembers the swirl of spirals in the pan, wax trails that hovered for an instant before breaking free to merge once again with the source. The slow cadence of drip, swell, ripple creates a gentle melody, one tuned to the household's heartbeat. It lulls each watcher into careful patience, for only in calm steadiness does perfect sealing arise. If a wick is drawn too swiftly, the wax will form clumps. If held too long, it will build an uneven shell. The balance is fine, and yet every pair of hands here has learned its measure. Having lifted the wick through its solitary dip, the mistress places it on a modest rack fashioned from slender rods of hazel wood. The slight curvature of each rod holds the wick, no longer limp, but stiffened by wax, just above the hearth's edge. Here, in the gentle warmth of ambient air, the coating will set. A faint hiss greets each transfer, a sibilant whisper of cooling wax. Overhead rafters catch the aroma of beeswax, sweet and faint, mingled with the earthy scent of burning oak. It clings to the scattered motes of dust that dance in the shafts of light slipping through the mullioned window. For a moment, every sense feels at rest. Scene after scene, wick after wick, the ritual proceeds with unhurried devotion. The father leans close to inspect the first coated strand, noting how the wax settles into the tiny spirals of twisted fiber. He points out to his daughter how the coating must be even, from tip to root, without thin patches or clinging lumps. She nods and reaches for the next wick, her small hands steadying with each repetition. Gloved or bare, each pair of hands follows the same path: submerge, pause, draw, set aside, observe. In this silent choreography, no one speaks more than a whisper, and yet they converse in a deeper tongue, the language of hearth and craft. As more wicks find their place on the rack, the heat from the hearth draws near enough to keep the wax pliant as it cools. A small breeze, slipping through the partly opened door, brings a note of autumn air and the distant promise of evening chores yet to come. Beneath it all, the metal kettle gives a soft sigh, steam spiraling upward in a gentle plume. All around, the rhythm of dripping wax continues, a counterpoint to the hearth's crackle. It is neither fast nor slow, but perfectly paced to the sighing of trees outside and the measured breathing of the household. Each drop resonates with quiet triumph, marking another wick sealed, another promise of even light. By the time the final thread is dipped and set aside, the rack holds a dozen or more wicks poised like small sentinels. Each is thicker than it once was, yet still pliable, strong enough to stand the trials of the next phases of candlemaking. Their pale, translucent shells catch the firelight, glowing almost opalescent in the hearth's embrace. The mistress runs a finger along one, feeling the cool smoothness that promises a clean burn. She nods, satisfied. Each wick is now ready for the next journey, alignment upon the dipping frame and the patient layering of wax that will form the body of the candle itself. As Chapter 8 draws to a close, the family steps back from their work. The air remains warm, tinged faintly with honey and smoke. Tools lie in order on the bench: shears, a small iron knife for trimming, wooden skewers for prodding. The round of labor is unbroken. Already one can glimpse the hooks of the dipping frame waiting in Chapter 9, ready to receive these sealed threads. For now, there is only this moment of calm reflection, of counting each perfect dip, of watching wax spiral in silent arcs, of knowing that the simple act of dipping a wick into molten wax holds within it the promise of light. Outside the mullions, dusk edges nearer, but within the hearthlit kitchen, all remains hushed and luminous, as if time itself had paused to honor the gentle art of sealing flame. A gentle stillness settles over the kitchen as the late morning sun filters pale beams through the mullioned windows. The hearth's fire burns low now, its embers glowing like coals of amber beneath a curving iron pot. All around, the air carries the soft, honeyed scent of beeswax mingled with the faint musk of rendered tallow. In one corner, the family's small daughter traces idle patterns in the ash beside a half-filled bucket of cooling water. In another, the baker's wife methodically gathers her tools for the next stage of their daily ritual. Today, they stand on the threshold between preparation and practice. The wicks, each thread thickened by a first gentle bath of warm wax, rest on wooden racks, cool and firm to the touch. Their fibrous cords are no longer soft and pliable but sturdy, ready at last to bear layer upon layer of molten wax until they emerge as slender, gleaming candles. But before the rhythmic dance of dipping can begin, these wicks must be ideal in their alignment, neither slack nor stretched beyond resilience. And so the dipping frame, an enduring tool of iron and wood, must claim center stage. Leaning against the tiled hearth, the dipping frame stands at the ready. Its long wooden beam, smoothed by years of handling, supports a series of wrought iron hooks, each precisely bent to cradle a wick without crushing its fibers. The hooks glint dimly, reflecting the hearth's shifting glow. With a soft scrape of leather and wood, the baker's wife adjusts her linen sleeve and approaches, careful not to disturb the silence that lingers like a prayer in the room. She lifts the frame with measured care, feeling its weight, neither too heavy for one hand nor so light as to lack substance. In her other hand, she carries the cooled wicks, their ends tapered neatly by the shear's delicate clip. Each wick has been measured against a small ivory ruler, an heirloom passed down from her mother, and trimmed to a length just shy of a finger's breadth longer than the tallest candle they hope to produce. Precision now is paramount. With one quiet nod, she seats the frame upon a low stool beside the hearth, where the heat still radiates in gentle waves. The wooden beam rests easily, poised between her hands. As she arranges the hooks, her fingertips trace the smooth curves of iron, finding the subtle bend that ensures each hook will hold a wick at the exact same angle. A faint metallic note arises as she taps each hook into position, soft clicks that echo like distant wind chimes in the hushed room. One by one, she threads a wick through the first hook's grasp. The softened wax coating gives slight resistance, then yields, allowing the fiber to slip into place. She pauses, lifts her head, and breathes in the warm fragrance of the hearth and the lingering sweetness of wax. This moment of calm reflection is as important as the act itself, for each candle will carry the memory of this morning's quiet care. Now, spacing must follow a measured rule. Too close, and the candles will fuse in the bath; too far, and they will cool unevenly in the air. She recalls her father's steady instruction: leave but a finger's width between each, that the wax may flow freely and the shadows not mingle. So she guides her fingers along the beam, placing each wick at deliberate intervals. The children's earlier chatter in the storeroom has faded, now it is simply the rhythmic brushing of cloth on wood, the soft sigh of thread settling into hook. At the third hook, the frame tilts slightly under her hand, and she rightens it with a soft creak from the stool. Momentarily, the wicks shift, and she readjusts two of them, sliding them just enough to regain uniform tension. She tests each one with the pad of her thumb, pressed lightly to ensure they are taut yet unstrained. A perfect balance, a whisper of give, a gentle resistance that promises a straight, even coating of wax. Behind her, the hearth crackles, and a thin spiral of smoke drifts upward from a small scrap of kindling. In that curling tendril, she finds a reminder of every candle they have made before, every family gathered by its flickering glow. Her heart warms with the thought, and she allows herself a brief, quiet smile. Each wick here will soon become a slender beacon, carried to mantels and tables across the chambered rooms of their home. Moving along the frame, her hand pauses at the midpoint, where 5 hooks have already found their wicks. She steps back, casting her eye down the line. By soft lamplight, though the sun still lingers high, the wicks appear as tiny ghosts, suspended in mid-air, each poised for transformation. She breathes, slow and steady, attuning herself to the gentle rhythm that will mark the next hours. In every household, this moment is the hinge between preparation and creation. With deliberate care, she fastens the remaining cords. The last wick slips into its iron cradle with a satisfying click, and she draws back to survey her work. The frame now holds 9 wicks, each at perfect tension, hanging in immaculate row. In the hearth's glow, the cords catch the light, revealing the faint ridges where wax has begun its journey to fullness. All that remains is the crucial inspection. She squares her shoulders and steps close enough to brush away the faintest speck of ash that has settled on one cord. With a slender brush, made from horsehair, she clears the minute particles that might mar the wax in the bath. Then she closes her eyes for a heartbeat, listening to the silence, broken only by the hearth's muted crackle and the slow ticking of the household clock, set into the wall above the doorway. When she opens them again, the frame stands ready, an orchestra poised for the conductor's baton. In moments more, the family will gather beside the kettle of molten wax, offering the frame to the simmering light, dipping its wicks in unhurried sequence until each slender candle grows firm with layer upon layer. But for now, the house holds its breath in anticipation. In the quiet that follows, the baker's wife lifts the frame, sliding it gently onto a stout wooden table beside the hearth. The warmth there is less intense but still comforting, reminding her that the work ahead will require patience and gracious calm. With a final glance northward, toward the small window where the church spire speaks silently against the sky, she whispers a soft benediction: "May our hands be steady, our hearts serene, and our candles true." Thus, chapter 9 closes in soft expectation. The wicks stand aligned, each one a promise of light to come. In their precise order, they reflect the care of generations who lived by the humble glow of domestic flame. And as the family gathers for the first dip, the world outside slows to match their measured rhythm, preparing at last for the gentle glow of candles rising from these waiting threads. Just past the sun's highest reach, a soft hush falls over the timbered kitchen. The midday meal has been set aside in favor of the ritual that gives each family its steady glow after dusk. Steam still rises in gentle coils from emptied porringers, and the scent of coarse rye porridge lingers in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of beeswax. The hearth fire has been stoked once more to a temperate glow, warm enough to keep the molten wax fluid, yet gentle enough to avoid sputtering and scorching. On the wide hearthstone, the iron cauldron of honey-colored wax sits atop a modest tripod. Its surface ripples like a sunlit pond, veins of heat undulating through its amber depths. Above it, the dipping frame, its wrought iron hooks curved and polished smooth, stands ready with a dozen slender wicks stretching across its breadth. Each wick, a sinewy rope of linen fibers tightly twisted, has been sealed in earlier steps to ensure uniform rigidity. Today marks their inaugural embrace of wax, their first baptism into the soft glow they will one day cast in shadowed rooms. Near the hearth, hands move with intentional calm. A woman in a homespun wool gown lifts the frame by a stout wooden handle. Her fingers, dusted faintly with white chalk and grains of dried wax, hold the handle as if cradling something fragile. Each slight tremor in her palm is matched by the whisper of her breath, measured and even, as though she counts her pulse against each moment. The children stand quietly to one side, entranced by the ritual solemnity. Even the cat, usually keen on sunbeams and scuttling mice, perches in a corner, its tail flicking with expectant curiosity. Slowly, the frame descends. The hooks, once glistening iron, meet the molten wax with a soft sigh. Heat shimmers in the air, and tendrils of steam rise where the hot wax greets the cooler morning light. Each wick slides beneath the molten surface in unison. For a heartbeat, the entire kitchen stands still, the crackle of embers in the hearth, the distant chime of the parish bell calling noon, the far-off crow of a rooster. In that pause, the wicks are swallowed by the amber pool, and the wax flows around each fiber, lapping in tiny, surging waves. When the frame halts its descent, the wax seals itself around the wicks in a thin, lustrous sheath. The pale linen turns golden for a moment, gleaming like threads of spun honey. The steam drifts upward, carrying the earthy sweetness of melted beeswax. A faint hiss, almost a whisper, sounds as the wax meets air at the surface, tiny bubbles bursting like soft sighs. The cook, leaning forward, breathes in quietly, savoring that delicate fragrance, a balm of honey and warm earth that speaks of summer hives and lazy sunlit afternoons. Time stretches. The woman's thumb brushes lightly against a nearby stick of chalk on the hearth's edge. She marks the moment in small numerals on the plastered wall beside the hearth, a tally of dips taken, a record of patient progress. A quick glance confirms the wicks are fully immersed, the coating even. She waits, feeling her own heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm, counting each thrum, 1, 2, 3, up to 10. At the 10th heartbeat, she begins to raise the frame. Her movement is deliberate, almost ceremonious. The iron hooks emerge first, like slender dancers stepping free from a shimmering pool. The wicks follow, lifting from the wax in slow, sculpted arcs. Golden filaments of cooled wax spiral down, clinging for a moment before dropping in soft beads to pool beneath the hearth. Each bead forms a miniature gem of hardened wax that will later be collected and reused, a resource to mind carefully in every 17th century household. As the wicks clear the wax, their surfaces glisten. They catch the firelight in slender filaments, each strand now bound with a fine coat that will harden to the first sturdy layer. The frame is settled on two low iron brackets by the hearth's edge, where a shallow basin of spring water stands ready. With deliberate care, the woman tilts the frame so that the tips of the newly waxed wicks just kiss the water's surface. A gentle hiss hovers as wax meets cool water, sealing the coating in an instant. Mist drifts up in feathery tendrils, catching sunlight from the small window high in the wall. For a moment, the world contracts to that simple meeting of hot and cool, of golden wax and sparkling water. Children lean forward to peer, their breath little puffs of warmth in the cool midday air. They watch as tiny ripples race across the basin, disturbed by wax droplets forming minute islands on the water's face. The older daughter gently scoops one such droplet from the basin with a wooden paddle, examination cloaked in hushed awe. The driftwood paddle is rough beneath her fingertips, but the wax bead smoothed into a perfect orb feels almost like polished glass. She returns it to the group of little extras collected from prior layers, each bead a silent testament to hours of careful labor. Beyond the hearth, the rest of the family moves in concert. A sun sweeps the floor of spent matchwood and ash, ensuring that the hearth remains bright without flare. A younger child pulls a fresh log from the stack, replacing a smoldering ember so that the wax bath stays at a constant glow. Their actions are mindful, practiced, everything here is geared toward the unhurried repetition that makes candlemaking an art of its own. There is no haste, no clamor, only the steady pace of hands and heartbeats. Once the wicks have sat for a minute above the water, long enough for the wax to solidify but not so long that the coating thickens irregularly, the frame is raised again. A soft clink marks its coming free. The woman taps the frame gently against the hearth lip, freeing any droplets clinging to the hooks. The wicks now hang in perfect parallel, straight, smooth, ready for their next immersion. Holding the frame up, she offers a small nod to her husband, who stands across the hearth polishing the iron kettle's handle. His eyes reflect the soft glow of the embers. No words pass between them. They share a quiet understanding that today's first bonding layer has set the rhythm for the rest of the afternoon's work, a pattern they will repeat dozens more times before evening candles emerge. The midday sunlight shifts, falling in a golden beam across the hearthstones. Dust motes drift lazily through the glow, drifting down like flecks of ash settled in still air. For a moment, the kitchen is silent, save for the patter of the hearth's embers and the gentle drip of wax beads into their collection pan. This is the heart of domestic life, the slow accretion of labor bound in wax, the meeting of flame and fiber, the promise of quiet light to come. Soon, the next dip will follow. The frame will be lowered again, steam rising in plumes, heartbeats counted in the hush. Each pass will add strength, each session of cooling will refine the form. But for now, the first bonding layer stands firm, a slender testament to attentive hands, patient hearts, and the centuries-old communion with fire that sustains every candle at eve. In this measured, unhurried moment, one senses that the simplest acts can be as profound as any grand event, the slow building of illumination, one thin coat at a time. The air in the workshop feels momentarily suspended as the freshly dipped wicks droop gently from the dipping frame, their slender lengths poised above the shallow basin of spring water. The basin, a low, wide-mouthed clay bowl warmed only by the hearth's lingering glow, sits at the center of the workspace, cradling clear, cool liquid that will coax the wax to set in tight, gleaming layers. A hush has fallen over the room, broken only by the rhythmic tick of a wooden peg clock high on the wall and the occasional soft crackle of embers behind the iron grate. In this quiet pause between each thorough immersion in molten wax and the next, the family and their apprentices hold their breaths, collectively leaning into the restrained magic of the moment. Mother stands nearest the table, her hands folded before her, fingernails still dusted with pale wax from the morning's stirring. She watches the strips of beeswax and tallow on the hearth cool to a firm consistency before every new dip, yet here, her gaze is fixed on the water's surface. Each wick, still warmed by its recent passage through the golden bath, drips tiny rivulets of wax that land with a faint sizzle, an almost whispered hiss that seems to echo, twice as soft, off the timbered walls. The droplets are so small, and yet in this silence they seem to crackle like distant hail on a rooftop, as one by one they shatter on the water's skin and roll into the depth of the bowl. The children stand a pace behind, their shoulders barely brushing as they lean on each other's coats, eyes wide with wonder. They learn in these moments that the ritual is more than mundane labor, it is a gentle alchemy, turning simple threads and melted fat into something that will carry warmth and hope through the darkest hours. They watch as, one after another, the wick's fibers, so soft when spun from flax, become encased in the amber sheath, stiffening almost at once on contact with the water. Here, the liquid acts as a sculptor's hand, chilling the wax to a firm hold, preserving each thin spiral that wrapped the wick in its molten embrace. A warm shaft of afternoon sunlight filters in through the lattice window, and upon the water's surface, dancing flecks of light shimmer and shift with every subtle movement of the wicks. The reflections mimic the flicker of candlelight itself, though no flame has yet been kindled. Ripples form when Mother gently tilts the frame, each wavelet catching the glimmer of the hearth's embers behind her. Through the open doorway, a distant church bell tolls twice, its low resonance drifting in like an old friend calling the faithful to prayer. The bell's sonorous tone mingles with the sibilant kiss of wax against water, binding the ritual in a tapestry of sound both soothing and profound. As the wax cools, the children murmur to one another in hushed tones. "Do you hear how softly it sings?" One whispers. The other nods, clasping her gloved hands, as though afraid to disturb the fragile miracle unfolding before them. The faint aroma of honey and hearth smoke drifts up in gentle wafts, reminding them of the golden combs unearthed from the storeroom that very dawn. This olfactory memory anchors them in the process. It was the comb's pure wax, precisely rendered and filtered, that now hardens in this shallow bath, layer upon patient layer. On the far side of the room, the apprentice, her sleeves rolled high above the elbow, fills a small ladle with fresh spring water from a wooden pail. She pauses before adding more, mindful not to raise the water level beyond its careful depth. Too high, and the dipped wicks would be submerged too deeply, cooling unevenly; too low, and the wax would pool at the edges, threatening to warp the taper's shape. Her measured caution is a testament to countless afternoons spent learning the vessel's exact capacity. After a moment's stillness, she withdraws the ladle and steps back, the metal's edge humming a muted note against the clay, another subtle instrument in this symphony of domestic craft. Time seems to stretch, and for a heartbeat the room holds nothing but the shared breathing of watchful artisanship. The mother's father, leaning on his carved walking staff by the doorway, records the moment in silence, how each wick glints like a slender pillar of ice, poised before transformation. He recalls mornings of his youth when candles were a luxury traded in town markets, and how now, by the simple grace of this process, his kin lard their own wax. His chest rises with quiet pride, for it is in these small acts, melting, straining, dipping, cooling, that the family ensures its nightly light, without calling upon distant lamplighters or coin purses in the market square. A soft exhalation passes among them, an unspoken cue that the wicks have cooled enough to bear the next dip. As the frame is lifted ever so slightly, the wicks release their tender hold upon the water, and each emerges firm but pliant, its surface no longer glistening with moisture but matte, cool to the touch. The hiss is gone now, replaced by the gentle scrape of wood upon clay as the frame is shifted toward the hearth once more. Mother steps forward, her posture serene, and lays her hand upon the iron hook that holds the frame steady. She tips her head toward the hearth, the next layer of wax waits, molten and expectant, as the afternoon's golden light warms the room in anticipation. In this unhurried turning of time, the household finds more than candles, it finds rhythm, unity, and a bridge between each passing hour. The children exchange sidelong glances, their hearts gentle with calm resolve, ready to guide the wicks again into the glowing bath. Outside, dusk will come swiftly enough, but in this moment, between dips and coolings, the world seems to hold its breath in tribute to the tender art of candle dipping, a ritual that will, in turn, grant them the soft glow to carry on when shadows gather and the hearth's last ember ebbs to gray. Thus does Chapter 11 close its door on the hush and sizzle of the cooling bath, setting the stage for that next, meticulous passage, the afternoon's refinement and troubleshooting, where each candle finds its final form before the quiet triumph of evening's first light. The light in the low window has shifted from a clear, pale glare to a warmer, more golden hue as the sun begins its gradual descent. In the workshop by the hearth, the family pauses the steady ritual of dipping to turn their careful attention inward, toward the fine details that will determine the quality of every candle to come. The air is thick with the lingering scent of beeswax, a faint sweetness mingling with the earthy smoke of the embers. Here, in this quiet hour between the midday dip and the next layering, the candles are not merely formed but tested, tended, and coaxed into perfection. A slender iron blade, darkened by heat and time, is drawn from the small wooden bench beside the hearth. Its edge has been honed on a whetstone many times, until it catches the light on each flick of a wrist. With measured movements, a hand reaches out to one of the half-formed candles hanging on the frame. The wax, still cool enough to handle but firm enough to yield under the blade, is inspected for any irregularities, small bulges, hidden clumps, and microscopic dimples that might mar the flame's even burn. The first gentle shave is felt rather than heard. A soft, almost inaudible scratch resonates in the quiet workshop as the knife slides along the taper, skimming away an unsteady ridge. The flakes of wax curl in delicate spirals, falling to the table with a muted thud. Fingers brush lightly over the newly smoothed surface, searching for any lingering roughness. A gentle tap of the knife's flat side against the wooden bench confirms its readiness for the next imperfection, and so the process continues, candle by candle, ridge by ridge, until each feels uniformly cylindrical and true. Between each careful trimming, the family exchanges hushed words about the hearth's subtle temperament. The fire grows shallow, one voice remarks, nodding toward the embers within the brick arch, we must raise the trammel by but a notch, suggests another. For the heat here is as important as the blade, too fierce, and the wax pools too quickly, melting into an uneven mass, too weak, and the wax hardens too soon, leaving thin patches that will burn faster than surrounding layers. The task of troubleshooting the hearth's heat is as quiet and precise as the work of the knife. A pair of worn leather gloves is pulled on for a moment as someone reaches to shift a log, raking the coals into an even bed of warmth. Sparks flicker upward as the brush of ash disturbs the sleeping embers, but the fire soon settles into a steady glow, radiating an even, gentle heat across the iron pan where new pools of wax await inspection. Meanwhile, the oldest daughter runs a soft thumb over the surface of one of these newly poured pools, gauging its thickness and its readiness. A slight indentation marks the wax, then slowly creeps back toward its original form, a sign that it has cooled to the proper hardness. It must feel firm, like the rind of a pear, she murmurs, recalling her mother's teaching. These little tests might seem trivial, but they ensure that each successive dip will adhere evenly, and that no unforeseen stress will cause a layer to crack or peel. Such imperfections might be invisible now, but by the time the candles are lit at dusk, they could manifest as a sputtering flame or, worse, an asymmetric burn that wastes the family's precious store of light. All the while, the scent in the room deepens. The honeyed note of pure beeswax is punctuated by a faint, smoky trace, reminders of midday frying in the great kitchen and the wood fires that supply warmth to every corner of the house. A small breeze drifts through the open door, bringing with it the distant song of a blackbird and the hushed tones of neighbors passing in the yard, their steps soft on packed earth. The outside world feels simultaneously distant and reassuring, as if the entire day's rhythm converges on this moment of quiet concentration. After the final measurement of wax thickness, taken with the narrow end of a slender quill gently pressed into the surface, the family returns the block of cold wax to a low shelf by the hearth. Here, blocks of tallow and beeswax rest side by side, each parcel bound in cloth and labeled by the date it was rendered. In a brief discussion, they note the slight variation in the wax's shade. The harvest of early summer yields a softer hue, someone observes, fingers brushing the pale cream of one block. Late autumn wax is always denser, replies another. These subtle distinctions matter, for the consistency and color of the finished candles will speak to the household's skill as well as the season of their making. With the hearth's temperature now carefully attended, the iron pan is slid further forward into the glow, giving the wax a moment more of gentle warming. The family exchanges soft glances, a shared understanding passing between them. The next dips will build upon this hour's precision. Soon, the frame will be lowered once more, and each wick will be enveloped in molten wax, layer upon layer. But before that gentle immersion begins, there is one more element to observe, the flame of the kindling candle that burns on a small iron spike above the hearth. This testing flame is but a single thread of light, yet it offers a living gauge of the hearth's readiness. Leaning close, the family watches the wick's slender silhouette, noting any flicker in its dance. If the flame wavers, they know the heat within the pan is uneven. If it drips black smoke, the fire must be refreshed. Today, the candle's glow stands steady and clear, promising that the next phase of work will proceed without flaw. Finally, as a slow hush settles over the workshop and the clock's distant chime reminds the family that afternoon is moving toward evening, they step back from the table. Tools are laid aside, the iron knife is wiped on a scrap of linen, the leather gloves are removed and tucked beneath the bench, and the small quill is returned to its place in the pocket of a mother's apron. The hearth's trammel is locked into position, and a final shovel of coals is tucked into the fire's heart. In this breath between tasks, the family drinks from a wooden cup of cool water drawn earlier from the spring. The liquid refreshes their hands, still faintly warm from the wax, and sustains the steady rhythm of their work. They exchange a quiet promise that each candle's surface is now honed and strong, a readiness upon which all the forthcoming layers will rely. Thus ends the hour of afternoon refinement and troubleshooting. In the next chapter, as the light outside softens into dusk, the frame will descend into the molten wax once more. Each wick will accept additional layers, building in fullness and glow until the candles stand ready to illuminate hearth and home. But it is here, in this slow hour of meticulous care, that the life of the candle truly begins, shaped by patience, guided by skill, and perfected by the gentle art of refinement. The late afternoon sun slanted through the narrow window above the hearth, striking the rows of half-formed candles with a gentle warmth. In the hush of the workshop kitchen, each breath carried the faint, honeyed fragrance of beeswax mingled with the earthy hush of tallow. Now that the first dozen or so dips had laid down their creamy coats, the candles stood awaiting further accretion, slender spirals of pale ivory suspended on iron hooks. Here in this softly lit space, the heart of the candlemaker's craft revealed itself not in a single motion, but in 1,000 quiet repetitions, layer upon layer, each as deliberate and unhurried as the one before. A hush fell as the eldest daughter, her skirts rustling like quiet wings, stepped forward to tilt the wax kettle slightly, letting the molten surface shimmer under the hearth's embers. Flames licked the sides of the iron vessel, a slender, welcoming blaze that maintained the wax at just the right warmth. Too hot, and the layers would run together and lose their evenness; too cool, and the dips would cling and crack as they cooled. With a gentle tug, she lifted the rack of wicks so that their lower ends hovered just above the molten pool. The soft hiss that followed, wax meeting the cooler metal hooks, marked the moment when the next pass could begin. Slowly, she lowered the frame until the tips of each wick breached the surface. At first, only a thin band of wax clung, like a delicate collar around each thread. She counted in her mind, 1, 2 heartbeats, before raising the frame ever so slightly. The molten wax clung and released, forming tiny ripples along the fresh ring. When the moment felt right, she began the upward sweep, palms steady and eyes soft. Each wick emerged gleaming, the new layer of pale wax dissolving into the curve of what had been built before. A symphony of quiet drips followed as the excess wax fell back into the kettle, 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. The children standing at her side watched in reverent silence. Their small faces glowed in the half-light, anticipation held in each breath. When the matron's nod came, one of the younger sons carefully tucked the rack back onto its hook above the cooling basin, letting the newly dipped candles hover over the spring water. There the faint shimmer of steam rose as the hot wax met the cool bath, a delicate mist that caught the light in suspended motes. The candle's outer layers hardened almost instantly, forming a border of translucent sheen around the still warm core. For a moment, everyone paused, savoring the hush. The hearth crackled low behind them, tossing out its own amber sparks. Thin rays of sun leaned through the window, illuminating the beads of moisture that trickled slowly down each candle's length. Here was the essence of the craft: patience, rhythm, and a constant, watchful eye. One could not rush this process. Each pass changed the candle's shape in ways subtle yet profound. Too many dips in rapid succession, and the rings would blur together; too few, and the taper would remain weak, the flame liable to sputter when the evening came. After several minutes, the steam above the cooling bath ceased. The candles hung motionless, dew fresh, their surfaces smooth and firm. The elder daughter lifted the rack again, guiding it back toward the wax kettle. In the iron pan at her side, scraps of old wick and bits of cooled dross had accumulated. She swept those aside with a small ladle, keeping the pool clean for the next layer. Then, locking her fingers around the wooden crossbeam, she began to lower the rack a second time, her motions echoing those of her mother and grandmother before her. Ring by ring, the wax built up, adding girth and weight to each taper, yet preserving its characteristic slenderness. The warmth from the hearth expanded gently into the room as more wax was drawn into the candle's shape. From where he knelt on the flagstone floor, the youngest boy could feel the radiating heat beneath his knees, as if the hearth itself were blessing each new layer. He inhaled the scent of wax in deep, contented breaths, warm, sweet, and slightly herbal. Beyond the hearth, he remembered, lay the sealed storeroom where blocks of unslaked lime kept silence over rows of firewood and tar jars. Here by contrast, everything spoke of life, of light yet to be born, of evenings warmed by familial gatherings, of whispered prayers and soft readings by candlelit hearth. As the rack re-emerged, lifted again above the cooling basin, the mother took her place beside the iron kettle. With careful precision, she adjusted the hearth's fuel, slender sticks of oak jabbed under the kettle's lip to coax the heat just so. She checked the wax's surface with the tip of a pin, feeling for ripples that suggested too much heat or too little. Then, satisfied, she focused on the rack, readying it for a third immersion. Each dip required the same unabated attention. Dropping too swiftly caused the wax to slather, pulling too slowly risked an uneven coating. Here, in these repeated gestures, the candlemaker's skill lay exposed, a near-invisible choreography of hands, heat, and waiting water. By the time the mid-afternoon church bells tolled outside, a soft hush had settled over the house. From the narrow street, muted footsteps crossed the threshold now and again, delivering firewood or fresh jugs of tallow. But inside, time moved in measured beats, aligned with the pace of the rack's descent and ascent. The candles themselves, once slender threads of linen, were now sturdy columns of wax, each perfect ring reflecting the hazy light. The family breathed in unity with the ritual: dip, lift, cool, dip, lift, cool. Over and over, until each taper attained the shape and heft that bespoke its readiness for the evening's illumination. Finally, when 5 full layers had been added, enough to ensure a slow, even burn when the candle met flame, the mother signaled the end of the dipping. With a soft exhalation, she withdrew the rack altogether, carrying it to the long wooden table where strips of leather and small shears lay ready. Here, the finishing touches would be made, trimming stray threads, evening out the bottom edges, and making final adjustments to length. But for this moment, they lingered by the hearth, their hands stroking the smooth surfaces of the newly built tapers. In that quiet interlude, as the last of the wax cooled in the basin, they allowed themselves a shared glance of satisfaction. The candles now bore an unbroken succession of wax rings, pale petals wrapped in perfect sequence around the heart of each wick. Soon, they would fill the mantel shelf, arrayed like silent sentinels against the gathering dusk. And later still, as darkness deepened, each candle's flame would arise from these patient layers, light born of repetition, calm perseverance, and the gentle art passed down from one generation to the next. Thus ended the chapter of layering, but not the story of that evening's illumination. For the glow fashioned in these waning hours would accompany them through dinner prayers and whispered stories. It would kindle warmth in the faces gathered around the long table, and in the end, lull every ear and eye toward restful slumber. Layer upon layer, they had built not only candles but the promise of gentle light. And in every hushed space where a taper would stand, that promise would shine on, bearing witness to the simple, timeless gift of homemade radiance. A warm, honeyed glow fills the workshop as late afternoon light filters through the small leaded windowpanes. The hearth's embers have settled to a gentle red warmth, and the steady rhythm of candle dipping has quieted to a hush. In this lull between tasks, each pair of hands turns toward the final, intimate art of trimming and shaping, an unhurried ritual that transforms rough-dipped wicks into elegant tapers destined to brighten the coming evening. On a stout oak table, its surface seasoned by years of dripped wax and soot, rows of newly built candles rest side by side. They stand in uneven ranks, some tapering too sharply at the tip, others bearing tiny, ragged curls of wax from overlapping layers. The family's candlemaster, an elder sister with care-creased hands, moves among them, eyes narrowed in the soft glow, mind attuned to each subtle irregularity. A small, bird-billed knife with a narrow, curved blade lies poised at her right elbow. Its steel is polished but bears fine nicks where it has carved away countless imperfections. She lifts the first candle, wrist steady. Under her scrutiny, the taper reveals a slight ridge where two layers of wax met with a whisper-thin seam. With a single, deliberate motion, the blade slides against the candle's side. There is barely a sound, a muted scrape, and a delicate sliver of wax peels away, curling like a translucent ribbon. The curl falls to the table with a soft sigh. The scented trace of warm beeswax drifts upward, sweet, earthy, calm. Across the bench, a younger sister follows suit. She compares two nearly identical candles, turning them slowly until the shifting daylight reveals uneven heights. Resting them shoulder to shoulder, she marks the difference with a fingertip, feeling for a ridge or a dip. Where one stands just a hair's breadth taller, she positions her blade at the base of the tip and slices off the surplus. The end becomes blunt and even, as though the candle itself has been coaxed into perfect symmetry. Between each cut, the sisters pause. Their breaths are soft. Outside, the church bells toll the hour in distant rhythm, each peal reminding them of the quieting world beyond the hearth. The scent of pinewood beams mingles with the beeswax, and motes of dust drift like tiny stars in the waning light. A child's faint laughter echoes in the next room, a playful counterpoint to the deliberate calm of this chamber. Once the major ridges and lumps have been removed, attention turns to finer details. Soft linen cloths, once swaddles for newborns and now devoted to smoothing wax, lie folded at the table's edge. Gently, each candle is wrapped in cloth and the hands glide up and down its length, warming the surface and polishing away the last whisper of roughness. As the cloth moves, it lifts off any stray hairs of lint and imparts a mellow sheen, giving the ivory surface a silky touch. Under the cloth's ministrations, small flaws vanish. Tiny filigrees of wax, left over from overlapping layers, soften and blend until each candle presents a seamless silhouette. The sisters exchange a glance of satisfied pride. In this moment, months of patient dipping have culminated in slender forms that promise a clean, steady flame. The cloth pockets at the table's edge receive skeins of shavings, pure, pale curls of wax that will later be melted down again to feed the hearth or to forestall waste. When one polishing cloth becomes too warm and working with it grows less precise, it is set aside, and another, cooler piece takes its place. The sisters are mindful of temperature. If the cloth is too hot, it will strike the wax too sharply, too cold, and the friction will fail to smooth. They keep a gentle balance, as they have learned from years at this hearth. Each cloth, smeared with soft yellow patina, bears the memory of countless tapers. At times, a slender finger coil of wax catches in a slight indentation. With the blade's tip, the sisters coax it free, shaving carefully until the surface regains a uniform straightness. Each scrape of the knife is measured, each sweep of the cloth deliberate. There is no hurry here, only the hush of concentration, the steady crackle of dying embers, and the soft patter of wax shavings settling to the wooden plank floor. In the corner, the father pauses mid-sweep as he checks a cluster of candles for uniform height. He lays them end to end, any that rise above their neighbors become subjects for trimming. He marks one with a pencil-thin snip, and the stroke is precise, no more, no less. The candle rings with a faint hollow sound as it is scored, and the newfound symmetry delights him. Gradually, the table's ranks shrink into tidy files. Each candle, now flawlessly straight and uniformly slender, stands ready. Their collective stillness holds a promise, that when dusk arrives, each will summon a warm sphere of flame, banishing shadow and offering comfort to a waiting family. As the sisters arrange the finished candles on a board near the hearth, they step back and let the fading light play across the smooth sides. The board itself is a crude rack, a makeshift bench where the tapers rest on their flared bases, awaiting their final chill. Soon, the hearth's residual warmth will fade entirely, leaving the candles to cool in the tempered afternoon air. By the time the household gathers again for supper, they will be firm to the touch, each a small masterpiece of domestic craftsmanship. Outside, dusky sky deepens to purple, and a thin breeze stirs the curtains. Within, the stillness remains sacred. Soon enough, the ritual of lighting will begin anew, the touch of ember to wick, the tentative glow that blossoms into steady light. But for this soft, suspended moment, all is calm. The trimming and shaping, this late afternoon labor of precision and care, has woven its quiet magic. In the gentle polish of beeswax and the measured cuts of a humble blade, the family's simple artistry reaches its culmination, setting the stage for the warm luminescence that will carry them through the approaching night. The late autumn dusk filtered through the mullioned windows of the low-ceilinged workroom, painting lines of pale gold across the rough-hewn floorboards. In the deepening shadows, the family's long afternoon of candlemaking had at last reached its natural resting point. Here, at the threshold between daylight's warmth and evening's hush, the newly formed tapers waited to find their final firmness. Chapter 15, Arranging Candles on Cooling Racks, unfolds in measured rhythm, as each thing, each person, each candle, each breath, moves together in quiet purpose. A stout wooden rack, built from bound saplings and reinforced at the joints with small iron nails, stood by the hearth's edge, its tiers of horizontal slats beckoning for the day's dozen candles. The wood, seasoned by years of gentle use, bore fine grooves along its length, its faint scent of pine and sap melded with the lingering undertones of beeswax in the air. The hearth itself cradled the last embers of the afternoon fire, sending up occasional wisps of curling smoke that mingled with the scent of honeyed warmth. Leaning into that gentle haze, the mother of the house reached out and lifted the first taper. She held it by its slender neck, just above the soft rise of wax that would one day spill into white rivulets once lit. The candle's surface was still slightly warm to the touch, pliant in places where the final dips had settled most thickly. Along its length, tiny ridges and valleys, signs of the patient layering process, caught the light, revealing a delicate interplay of shadows and highlights. The wax was no longer fluid but not yet brittle, at that perfect moment when it would cool and harden into a gleaming ivory column. Gently, she guided the base of that candle into the first groove of the rack's lowest level. The fit was precise, not so tight as to risk cracking the wax, yet firm enough that the candle would stand true. A soft creak rose from the rack's joints as the weight settled. Then she placed the next, adjusting its angle by the faintest fraction, ensuring that every taper would rise in parallel rows, like young birch saplings in early spring. With calm deliberation, she continued until the lower row held 16 slender lights, each separated by the same small space. All the while, the hearth's embers glowed low, lending the room a gentle flicker that danced across the rack and the pale columns of wax. The flickering cast wavering shadows on the walls, making the candles themselves seem to pulse with a life of their own. In that moment, the room felt suspended between labor and rest, caught in a graceful transition as the earth outside darkened. A soft shuffle at the doorway announced the arrival of the eldest daughter. Carrying a small bundle of linen cloths, once used for straining the wax, she paused at the threshold, eyes bright with quiet excitement. In a hushed voice she asked if she might join in placing the final tears. Her mother inclined her head, handing over a candle that still retained the warmth of the last dip. The girl's slender fingers closed around it with careful attention, she felt the gentle resistance of soft wax beneath her fingertips. Placing it upon the middle shelf of the rack, she rewarded herself with a small smile, the corners of her eyes illuminating in the firelight. All through the room, the sounds were muted yet rich, the faint rasp of wood against wood as each candle's base slid into its place, the rustle of linen skirts brushing the floor, the gentle drum of water as the kettle on the side trammel kept a low simmer for the next stage of work. Overhead, the timbers of the ceiling groaned now and then, a reminder of the house's age and the many seasons it had sheltered. But in the hush of this moment, such sounds felt like part of the familiar melody of home. As the daughters and their mother rose to the higher shelves, the candles formed neat clusters, tier upon tier, like pale constellations awaiting the night. Each taper, still warm near its base, supported the one above without wobble. When the final candle clicked into place at the topmost row, the rack bore a gentle bow, an arc of dedication and skill. A hush fell over the family, as they stepped back to honor their collective handiwork. Then, in the corner of the room, the youngest child peered from behind a supportive beam, whispering with wide-eyed wonder about when these candles would first illuminate the long dining table. His voice was muffled but carried a tone of impatient joy. In response, his mother guided him forward, allowing him to trace the soft edge of a wax spiral with one small fingertip, feeling the ridges cool beneath his skin. The child's breath caught at the faintly sweet aroma of beeswax, woven through with a tallow note, an ache of comfort and memory even at such a tender age. Outside, the church bells tolled the quarter hour, echoing through the lane beyond the casement windows. Dust motes drifted lazily through the columns of dim light, dancing around the rack as though curious to behold the finished candles. The family lingered in that interval, savoring the hush before the next chapter of the evening's tasks, a final coiling of wicks, the gentle wiping of tools, and the clearing of hearth embers for their simple supper. The mother reached for a length of coarse cloth, wiping away a stray bead of wax that had pooled at the edge of one downslope. She ran her forefinger along the candle's side, smoothing the surface until it shone like the inside of an oyster shell. With each pass, she pressed gently, coaxing the wax into a refined form that would burn evenly when the wick was finally lit. These small finishing touches were as important as any earlier step, in them lay the promise of a steady flame, unmarred by drips and lulls. As the room fell deeper into shade, the rack at last stood fully loaded, candles gleaming in patient rows. The family shared a moment of mutual recognition. They were guardians of the dusk, having fashioned small beacons that each household in the village would soon call upon to banish the encroaching dark. The labor of their hands, guided by centuries-old tradition, would meet its purpose before tonight's end. At that turning point, Chapter 15 closes upon the sight of the candles' ivory ranks, cool now and firm, waiting. The worktable behind them stands ready for the next scene, where the hearth will be cleaned, tools set aside, and the house transformed from workshop to common room. Soon, the gentle ritual of pre-evening rest and hearth mending will follow, leading naturally into the lighting of the first candle and the gathering of kin around its soft glow. In the quiet aftermath of placement, the rack itself seems to exhale, as though content with its weight of light, and the family, too, leans back in silent gratitude before the day's final tasks draw them forward. When the late afternoon sun begins to dip toward the western hills, painting the rammed earth walls with a warm, amber glow, the family pauses its steady industry. After hours of patient dipping, trimming, and arranging, the workshop hearth has borne witness to the gentle alchemy of beeswax and tallow transformed into slender tapers. Now, as dusk approaches, the time has come for a different kind of ritual, the careful unmaking of the day's labors, so that hearth and tools may rest clean and ready for tomorrow. Near the hearth's low iron grate, the master tallow maker lifts a heavy pancake of cooled wax that clings stubbornly to the bottom of an iron pan. Its surface is streaked with fine scratches, small ridges left by countless scrapes and schemes. With the patient deliberation of long practice, he leans forward, bracing his elbow on the brick hearth. In one smooth movement, the broad scraper, a slender wedge of wrought iron, slides beneath the wax. There is a slight, reluctant crack as the cold wax lifts away from the pan's blackened belly. He tilts the scraper, and a chunk of hardened wax breaks free, clattering into the iron bucket placed at his side. That steady rain of wax fragments, tumbling one after another, echoes softly in the quiet room. His wife stands at the edge of the hearth, dipping a coarse linen cloth into a basin of warm water. The cloth, once pale and bleached by sun and repeated washings, bears now faint striations of yellow. She wrings it in a slow, twisting motion, working out every drop of amber-tinged liquid until the cloth feels only gently damp. Then she sprinkles a little vinegar, just a splash, over the cloth's surface. The sharp tang mingles with the lingering scent of honeyed wax. With the same methodical care she uses when draping fresh linen over the dipping frame, she wipes the scraped pan, her hands moving in small, concentric circles to lift twilight's last traces of tallow and grime. A daughter kneels beside a small clay pot once used for melting scraps of beeswax. Streaks of hardened residue cling stubbornly to its interior. She presses a small bundle of dried brush into service, twigs of willow bound by a length of cord, and uses them like a stiff, natural broom. Each flick of the brush loosens the wax, sending driftwood-colored flakes to the basin below. Then she douses the pot with warm water, traces more vinegar, and rubs with a second cloth until the pot's red-brown clay surface feels smooth and even, free of bumps or sticky spots. As she works, she listens to the kettle's final hiss as the last few droplets of wax-laden water meet the coals. Across the hearth, a son retrieves the rows of wooden skewers and metal hooks that once held the forming candles aloft. Carefully, he gathers each piece, noticing the small beads of wax that cling to their tips. He places them one by one on a shelf near the window, where the cool evening air will hasten the remaining drips into brittle shards. He sets a tin basin beneath the shelf to catch whatever wax might still fall. Over time, those drippings will be remelted, ready to join the next day's process. For now, they form irregular little stalactites, pale amber teardrops curving toward the basin's flat bottom. At the hearth's center, the coals burn lower now. The crackle has softened to a faint murmur, like distant laughter. The master tallow maker uses a small shovel to rake the ashes into a metal pan. Each scoop reveals the faint orange glow of embers, then shades to gray and white as the shovel lifts the ash away. A gentle breeze drifts through the open doorway and stirs the cinders, sending minute sparks drifting upward for a heartbeat, embers that wink and fade before they can singe. Once the hearth floor is clear, the pan is set aside, and fresh kindling is stacked neatly to one side of the grate, ready for tomorrow's dawn. While each member of the family bows between tasks, mother at the pans, father at the grate, daughter at the pot, son at the hooks, they share a soft companionship. The measured scraping, the swishing of cloths, the hushed rattle of ash shifting in the pan become a slow conversation, one of gestures and shared rhythm rather than words. Occasionally, a question about tomorrow's work arises in a low voice: how many candles will they need next week? Should they render more beeswax from the latest honey harvest or rely on tallow until after Martinmas? Each query is answered with a patient tone, barely louder than the hearth's final exhalations. At last, the last tool is cleaned. A carefully rolled bundle of cloths, once used for straining molten wax, lies pristine on a ledge above the worktable. The iron ladle, blackened and pitted, is scraped of its final flecks of debris and placed to drain beside the kettles. The scrapers rest, handled smooth, in a leather pouch that will hang by the workshop door through the long night. The basin of warm, vinegar-tinged water is lifted from the hearth, wrung into a second bucket prepared to catch the gray runoff. With each tool stowed and each surface scrubbed clear, the hearth feels suddenly empty, as though it sighs with satisfaction at the day's labor now concluded. The family steps back, their work done, and the workshop exudes a calm hush. The air is tinged with the sharp sweetness of vinegar and the deeper, round perfume of beeswax, a memory of warmth that lingers even as the heat fades. In the waning light, they wrench the door closed against creeping dusk and carry the buckets and pans back to the kitchen for one final rinse. Dirt and wax swirl away from iron under streams of clear water, leaving bright metal in their wake. The wooden scraper rests, dry, on the table's edge. The willow brush stands in a small jar of water, bristles up, ready for the next sweep. As they return to the hearth for supper, the workshop behind them lies silent, a sacred place of transformation laid to rest. The hearth's bricks still carry the faintest warmth against the stone floor, as though reluctant to relinquish the memory of melted wax and shared purpose. In its hearthside quiet, one can almost hear the gentle promise of morning's first light, when, once more, the family will awaken before dawn to coax their fire alive, to gather wax, to dip and shape and pray for steady hands and even heats. But for now, as the last glimmer of sun settles into twilight, they set aside the tools and join hands in a brief moment of gratitude, for the hearth that sustains them, for the gifts of wax and wicks, for the soft glow that will soon guide their evening meal. And in that quiet pausing, chapter 16 closes, preparing both hearth and hearts for the ceremony of light that waits in chapter 17, when the first evening candles will be struck alight, sending their flickering hush into the coming night. Evening settled beyond the mullioned windows, a quiet hush draping itself over the timbered walls as dusk deepened into gentle gloom. The household had paused its labors, the hearth, newly swept of ash, lay calm beneath the wrought iron hood, embers glowing faintly at its heart. Each tool of candle-making, iron pans, wooden frames, stirring ladles, had been washed, wiped with cloth steeped in warm water and vinegar, then suspended from wall pegs or set aside on the dresser. Pools of residual wax dripped slowly from spoons into a waiting bucket, their glistening beads testimony to the day's patient toil. Now, as the sun's last pale fingers retreated from the sky, the family gathered around a long oaken table to honor the ritual that would bring light into their simple home. A slender candle, freshly dipped and cooled, lay upon a folded scrap of linen at the mother's place, ivory taper against russet cloth. Its surface glowed softly, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Nearby, on the mantelpiece, rows of identical tapers stood in neat lines, their shapes gently warped by countless dips, each one a testament to rhythm and care. Outside, the village church bell tolled the hour, its low, sonorous knell drifting faintly through the open door and mingling with the fire's last whispers. The children paused in their laughter to listen, then shuffled to form a silent line behind their parents. Even the small dog, roused from a nap by the shifting shadows, lifted its head to watch the scene unfold. Father knelt at the hearth, embers glowing like embers beneath gray ash. He retrieved a twisted willow stick, sharpened at one end, and nestled it among the coals. The bit of dry wood smoldered at once, releasing a thin veil of smoke before brightening into a steady hearth ember. With deliberate care, he tested the stick's tip, drawing it clear of ash and offering it to Mother, who held the chosen taper just above the glowing ember. For a moment, breath held in reverent stillness, the fine wick absorbed its warmth until a tiny flicker appeared, dancing at its tip. A small sigh of satisfaction drifted from Mother's lips as the flame steadied, a teardrop of fire that clung to the wick. She allowed the new flame to grow in confidence, coaxing it with a gentle breath to steady its dance. The candle's slender body, pale as harvested wheat, turned golden in the firelight. As Mother lifted the candle upright, she passed it, hand to hand, toward the eldest daughter. The child held her palm beneath the flame, marveling at its warmth, then placed the lit taper into a simple wrought iron holder anchored at the table's center. The holder's curved arm received the candle with a quiet click, and it stood at attention, the first of many lights to come. One by one, each family member received the flame from a neighbor's taper, respecting the fragile bond that passed from wick to wick. No words were spoken, the hush was complete save for the faint crackle of the hearth and the soft hiss as the wick drew up its first nourishment of wax. As each taper found its place, the table brightened in soft concentric circles of amber. The smooth faces of bread loaves, stacked in woven baskets, took on a warm hue. Plates of stoneware glowed, and the turned-wood bowls holding pottage and porridge reflected the candle's gentle aura. Mother watched her children's faces, lit from beneath, their features softened and animated in quiet wonder. The eldest son leaned forward, shading his newly lit taper with a tentative hand to steady its flame. He glanced at his sister, whose eyes mirrored the tiny blaze, then grinned in triumph as her candle held fast. Father rose and, in a voice as soft as moss underfoot, offered a few whispered words of gratitude for the light made by their own hands and for the hearth that sustained them. A murmur of assent followed, as if blessing the candles themselves. The fire's glow complemented each flicker, only now the hearth served not to melt wax but to nurture warmth and comfort. Shadows waltzed across the worn boards of the floor, curling and stretching toward the corners where night lingered. Cabinets and iron pots, once dark and silent, emerged now in soft focus, shapes partially revealed then swallowed once more by the gloom beyond the candlelight's reach. The scent of beeswax mingled with the earthy tang of the embers, filling lungs with its honeyed sweetness. Every now and then, a small crackle rose from the hearth as a remnant of wood surrendered its life to the flames. A drop of molten wax fell softly from one taper's side, landing on the table's edge with a slight thud, then solidifying almost instantly. The family listened, together and apart, to these quiet notes, the cloth rustle as sleeves moved, the soft scrape of wooden chairs settling into place, the measured breaths of those seated. It was a symphony of stillness and small sounds, each one heightened by the mellow darkness all around. By the time the last candle was alight, the table stood ringed in gentle radiance. The mother and father exchanged a contented glance. No longer merely a table in a drafty cottage, it had become a haven, luminous and warm. The children settled into their seats, eyes half closed as if already drifting toward dreams, yet fully present in this moment of shared serenity. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo, and stars began to appear like scattered pinpricks of light, distant relatives of the homeborn flames within. Though supper awaited, a modest fare of stewed root vegetables, thick barley bread, and fresh spring water, the meal would be eaten in companionable silence, each bite accompanied by the soft glow and the crackle of fire. And when the last drop of pottage was consumed, and the plates were stacked for washing, the candles would remain at their posts, guardians of the night, their flames gently swaying as if murmuring lullabies. Soon, the family would disperse to their chambers, leaving the tapers on the mantel to keep watch until dawn. Tonight, however, they lingered a while longer. The mother reached across the table to gather her children's hands, the candle's reflections dancing on their joined palms. Father extended his arm to rest a steadying hand upon her shoulder. All around them, in that modest home, the craft of the day, melting, straining, dipping, trimming, culminated in this sweet moment of illumination. The simple ceremony of lighting the first evening candles reminded them of their shared labor, of the quiet artistry woven into every slender taper. In that soft light, the trials of daily toil slipped away, and the home became a small sanctuary, where the art of candle dipping lived on in every warm, flickering glow. And as the household finally rose from the table, carrying a last cup of water or a lingering loaf of bread to the hearth's edge, the candles remained, their tenure only beginning. Beyond this night, when the flames would dance upon the wooden beams and walls, stories and memories would fill the air. But for now, the first evening candles stood proud and bright, each slender column a testament to patient hands, to hearth-born artistry, and to the gentle whisper of light conjured at dusk. Night has fully settled over the timbered walls of the kitchen, and the hush that follows the final embers of day feels almost sacred. In the center of the room, the hearth still glows with a mellow warmth, the last logs crackling softly as they give way to glowing coals. Above, the rafters disappear into gathering darkness, etched only by the quivering light of dozens of newly dipped candles arranged upon wooden racks and the mantel. Each slender taper stands like a silent sentinel, its flame performing a quiet dance, a minute flicker here, a gentle bob there, casting a tapestry of soft shadows that ebb and flow against rough-hewn beams and whitewashed walls. The air is heavy with the subtle honeyed scent of beeswax mingling with the faint tang of lingering tallow, a fragrance that speaks of labors concluded and hearthside rest well earned. An elder woman, her hair caught in a single silvery braid tucked against a simple shift, settles herself upon a low stool near the hearth. Her hands, roughened by years of stirring cauldrons and kneading dough, fold into her lap as she draws in a slow breath. Across from her, two children perch on stout wooden stools, their eyes wide in the lamplight as they lean forward to catch every word. The girl, no more than 8 seasons old, traces patterns with her fingertip upon the grain of a rafter beam illuminated above her, while her younger brother clasps a stubby candle between small hands, marveling at how its wax surface captures glow. Between them lies a world of flickering geometry, arches, diamonds, ridges, projected by the clustering candles on the mantel, and they watch the shapes shift as their grandmother begins to speak. Her voice, soft and measured, flows like a slow river. When I was your age, she begins, the winter nights pressed in so tightly that a single candle would seem like an entire sun. We would huddle close together, my siblings and I, and listen to the wind buffeting the shutters, the far-off tolling of St. Michael's bell over the village green. Every hour it marked with a solemn chime, reminding us time went on even as the snow drifted deeper outside. She pauses, her gaze drifting upward to where one tall candle flickers beside the black iron crane. Those nights taught me that darkness can feel endless, yet we always carry our own small lights within. A hush settles more deeply, broken only by the fireplace's sputter and the measured toll of the distant church bell. 20 strokes mark the passing hour, low and resonant, drifting through open windows to mingle with the warm interior hush. Somewhere beyond the door, cattle stir, and an owl's solitary call echoes faintly against the cold stone of outbuildings. Inside, the family's breathing grows slower, synchronized almost to the candle flames. The gentle hiss of a single droplet of wax, freshly formed from the day's dipping, landing on the edge of a cool pot, seems startlingly loud in the stillness. The children listen, their eyelashes catching the golden glow. As the grandmother's story continues, she recounts the ritual of gathering about the hearth after a long day's toil. She paints a picture of her own mother, dipping wicks, guiding her small hands as they learn to count each descent of the frame into molten wax, then the swift lift and the hush of the cooling bath. Those tender memories hold a special warmth, both from the glowing candles and from the closeness of kin. The voices of her brothers and sisters, now voices long stilled beneath the churchyard yew, still live in each ripple of scent and every soft flicker. Here today, around this same hearth, that quiet chorus seems to rise once more, murmuring encouragement and calm. Outside, a breeze schemes through the open casement, carrying in a whiff of crisp night air. The candles' flames tremble, sending the shadows dancing upon wooden benches and an old oak table lined with simple earthenware mugs. The family's supper dishes, now tucked away, left only a faint aroma of barley broth and onions. The kettle, removed from the fire, has cooled and sits overturned upon a trivet, its handle still warm to the touch. A pair of iron tongs rests on the hearth, their jaws slightly apart as if sighing in contentment. The tools of the day are at peace, their work complete, aligned patiently for the morrow's tasks. In a hushed murmur, the children ask for tales of moonlit journeys beyond the village, of hunters tracking deer through whispering pines, of firelit companions telling fortunes by candles' glow. The grandmother smiles, her eyes bright with reflection, and allows herself a moment longer in the amber serenity before she answers. She recalls secret midnight gatherings in neighboring cottages, where neighbors would bring their scarcely enough candles to share light, collectively creating a gentle radiance that banished both frost and fear. Those evenings, she explains, were neither grand feasts nor boisterous affairs. They were quiet concerts of everyday voices, woven together in conversation, laughter, and sometimes tears, beneath the soft glow of humble tapers. As her tale winds to a close, she exhales, and the haze of memory seems to settle over the group like a gossamer veil. The children, their eyelids now heavy, offer a contented sigh. Their outlines grow slack, limbs uncurled, as sleep gently approaches on silent feet. Above them, the candles continue their slow ritual, burning down a fraction here, drifting a ribbon of smoke there, until only a faint halo remains, no larger than a moth's wing. The hearth whispers its last stories to the coals, which glow like embers behind a curtain of ash. Everything within this small chamber rests in shared assurance. Dark may linger, but light endures so long as hands shape wax and wicks and the hearth remains tended. A final peal of the distant bell reminds the household that it is late, yet in this moment time seems suspended. The grandmother rises with the measured grace of long habit, gathering the children in simple embraces. She carries them, one under each arm, toward a side door that leads to narrow stairs. The candles' reflections follow them, pale dancers cast upon the polished chestnut floor. As the door closes, muffling the final crackle of dying fire, the candles remain as silent guardians of the room. Their collective glow stands vigil, a lullaby in wax and flame, anchoring the house in warmth and quiet. Outside, the church bell fades into the velvet night, and all within rests under the gentle watch of candlelight. The embers in the hearth had long since settled into glowing coals, their fierce orange tongues now reduced to a quiet, blood-red pulse beneath the cold brick arch. A hush had fallen over the kitchen workshop, broken only by the occasional sigh of cooling stone and the soft settling of ash. The day's labor, forging light from wax and wicks, was done, and in its place rose a gentle stillness, as if the very walls exhaled in relief. It was in this tranquil hour, when both hearth and workers rested, that the careful ritual of stowing away leftover wax and tools began. First came the gathering of wax remnants. Across the wide table and hearth ledge lay fragments of beeswax and tallow, golden chips, paler shavings, small globs where the molten pool had crept beyond the dipping frame. A slender knife, its iron blade darkened by heat, was retrieved from the hook overhead. In one languid movement, its edge flicked beneath each wax flake, coaxing it free. There was a subtle crackle as brittle edges parted from the richer cores, each piece carrying the faintest residue of hearth smoke and honeyed aroma. A small wooden bowl, smoothed by years of handling, received every scrap, and with each transfer, the family's mindfulness deepened. Even the smallest wafer of wax was precious, a glimmer of tomorrow's candlelight. Once the bowl brimmed with irregular shapes, nuggets of amber and pale ivory, the wax needed to be sheltered from dust and damp air. A length of fine linen cloth, woven with tight, even threads, was spread over the workbench. The bowl was poured onto its center. Soft tussles of wax clattered against the fibers, drawing out stray wood chips or fragments of cloth. Then, with measured care, the linen's corners were brought together, enfolding the wax in a gentle bundle. The cloth's cool texture brushed fingertips as folds were smoothed, corners tucked, and a length of twine wrapped spirally around the package. Each twist of rope sang softly against the cloth, binding the wax in a snug coil that would sit quietly in the chest until the next day's melting pot. The wooden chest itself was a low, stout box of oak, its surface nicked by seasons of use. After the wax packet had settled into one corner, the lid was closed and latched with a simple wooden peg. Nearby, other bundles, dating back to the week's earlier labors, slotted beneath a shelf of neatly labeled tubs: beeswax, pale, tallow, soft, tallow, firm. The chest's interior smelled faintly of resin and rubbed oil, a fitting perfume for stores of candle material. Turning away from the chest, attention shifted to the frames once crowded with glistening candles. The iron rack, its hook still moist from the final dip, gleamed in the ember light. One by one, each wooden crosspiece was lifted from its resting place. The slender wicks, now encased in layers of wax rings, were gently tugged free, the careful friction sounding a soft metallic click as each hook released its precious burden. The candles, cooling and firm, lined themselves along the bench while the emptied frame was carried to the wall. There, a wrought iron peg had been reserved for just this purpose, a low, stout spur driven into the beam overhead. With a quiet tap of the wrist, the frame's top bar settled into the notch. The faint echo of metal on metal seemed to seal the day's work away, leaving the candles to rest in undisturbed darkness until evening's lighting. Below the frames, a row of clay pots, once used to hold cooling wax or water, awaited nesting. Each vessel had been rinsed earlier in warm water drawn from the kettle, its interior swabbed with a cloth dipped in vinegar to dissolve any stubborn bits of residue. Now bone-white and matte, the pots were stacked with deliberate care, the largest at the bottom, then medium, then small. Their rims fit neatly into one another, forming a compact pillar of pottery. These stacks were shifted to a low shelf beside the doorway, where rising morning light would wash across them, ready at dawn's first stir. Nearby, a collection of ladles, skimmers, and spatulas, implements of iron and wood, stood patiently on narrow hooks. Each had been scrubbed of wax beads, then coated with a film of lard to prevent rust. Handles, once shining with recent use, had been wiped down so that no slick spot remained to betray the day's labors. The long-handled ladle, its bowl curved to catch molten wax, was carefully centered between two smaller tools, each hanging precisely an inch apart. This orderly display rendered the kitchen silent but confident, as if every spoon and scraper already knew the shape of tomorrow's work. On a small stool by the hearth lay the night's lanterns, delicate frames of oiled paper and thin wood, each enclosing the flickered remains of an earlier flame. One by one, the family knelt to tend these vessels. With the gentlest breath, the wicks were coaxed to a final, shuddering glow and then extinguished with a muffled pop. Fingers closed lightly over the metal vents, sealing out air, and the paper sides softened in the residual warmth before cooling to a pale crispness. Each lantern was lifted by its hooked handle and carried outside the hearth's reach, then placed upon a low shelf in the entryway where they would wait through the night, silent sentinels against any hint of darkness. When tools, wax, wicks, and lanterns had all found their appointed places, the hearth space felt suddenly cavernous, empty of purpose, yet brimming with promise. The bricks, still warm to the touch, glowed with a modest heat that would linger for hours. Here and there, a stray ember nestled among the ash, its pulse faint. The family stood quietly in that glow, breathing in the lingering harmony of wood smoke, wax, and hearth fire. It was a moment suspended between labor and rest, the threshold where one day's toil dissolved into the comfort of night. In that pause, each member of the household cast a thoughtful glance over the tidy workshop. The scattered fragments of once active work, bundles of wax, racks of candles, gleaming tools, had been gathered into neat order. Tomorrow, they would rise again to this same hearth, and with patience and repetition, weave light from humble materials once more. But tonight, it was enough to honor the closing of one cycle before the next would begin. Finally, the last lantern was set aside, its glass panel catching the soft amber sheen of the coals. The family exchanged a few low words of thanks for the day's smooth passage, then moved toward the wooden door whose latch creaked in greeting. Stepping into the corridor beyond, they left behind the warm hush of the candle-making space. In that narrow passage, footsteps were muffled on the rushes. Only the distant echo of a settling roof beam answered as the house prepared itself for sleep. And within the silent workshop, the tools slumbered, the wax lay wrapped, and the coals cooled into gentle embers, ready, in the hush of morning, to kindle the next chapter of the gentle art of candle dipping. The household has drawn its curtains on the long day's labors, and only a single, slender taper remains alight upon the mantel. Its flame trembles softly in the stillness, as though unsure whether to burn brighter or to slip quietly into memory. In the dim chamber beyond the hearth's reach, the wooden floorboards lie slick with the evening chill, and the air carries the lingering scent of beeswax and rendered fat, sweet and faintly earthy, a gentle reminder of every warm dip and patient stir since dawn's first pale light. After the final snips of excess wick and the last smoothing of cooling wax, the family left their workshop tools and unspent shavings of tallow and honeyed yellow beeswax in neat repose. The iron ladles hang cold now, their curved surfaces dulled by a thin, congealed veil of wax that catches every stray ray of light as though recalling the molten heat of midday. The wooden frames, once carrying rows of glimmering threads, rest idle near the hearth, their hooks empty and silent. Even the clay pots and troughs that bore water for the candle's final hardening have been emptied and set aside, wiped clean by worn cloths now draped across the handles. All that remains is this single candle, glowing with a steadiness born of countless dips into gentle heat and languorous water. Beneath its small flame, the hearth's embers sit gray and cooling, starved of fresh kindling, their crackle and spit long since stilled. The restless shadows they once cast upon the brick back wall have softened now into yawning, gentle pools of dark. Each time the candle's wick breathes, the wick's charred tip flickers, exhaling a fragile plume of pale smoke that drifts upward, dissipating among the rafters. From time to time, the slight movement of the flame seems to reach, just for a moment, toward these lingering embers, an unspoken desire to rekindle the day's warmth for one fleeting hour. Even here, in enforced hush, the chapters of the day rise once more in memory. I picture the early morning, when the oven's soft blue glow beckoned us from slumber, and my hands learned anew the weight of tallow blocks as they slipped into the cold iron pan. I feel again the swish of molten wax pouring through linen, the way it swelled and spread in golden rivulets, gathering impurities into a straining cloth before flowing so clear and bright into its waiting bowl. I recall the hush that fell when I first placed those hardened wicks on hooks, the careful tap-tap of iron adjusting catches, the approving nod that passed between workmates as each wax-bound cord took its turn under the hearth's measured heat. With each passing dip, that daily ritual slowed our breath, and the world outside, barnyard murmurs, distant church bells, the faint memory of men treading home from the fields, slipped further away. In its place came the constant hiss of wax meeting water, the subtle swelling of each candle as layer upon layer found its place, the mindful, unwavering gaze of artisans attuned to the smallest flaw. Hours folded into one another as gently as the wax petals that spiral down from each rising taper. When, at last, we sat aside our tools for a humble supper of rye porridge and crusty bread, the hearth glowed with the promise of evening, our candles poised to chase back the dark. Now, in these final minutes before rest, only this one candle keeps vigil. Its flame bends toward the silent corridor where footsteps once passed with baskets of cloth and bowls of water. I can almost hear the creak of the corridor's wide planks as the children tiptoed past to fetch a cup of ale, the soft scrape of a stool as their mother perched near the hearth to stir the wax pot. Those sounds have faded into the hush, replaced by the whisper of candlelight murmuring against the walls, an unhurried symphony of warmth and calm. The mantel stands as a quiet monument to our work. Along its length, 8 newly formed tapers had once rested side by side, each one now affixed to iron sconces in the adjacent chambers. Tonight, they serve as nightly sentinels to weary sleepers, their polished surfaces awaiting the spark that will kindle their hearts against the chill of dawn. In one final glance, I admire the slender column of wax still intact here, quiet, unblemished, and flickering with life. I imagine the first ember I shall strike against its rough edge tomorrow, the subtle crackle as I draw flame to wick, and the gathering brilliance that will drive away the gray morning shadows. But until then, I remain alone in gentle silence. My footsteps have retreated, my breath is soft, measured, as if not to disturb the candle's fragile vigil. Beyond the curtained window, the night air has settled into a cool, prayer-like hush. No wind moves against the glass, no owl calls, no distant murmurs drift across the slate roofs. Here, time seems to pause upon the curve of this flame, reluctant to hurry toward the deep hours when sleep will claim every living soul within these timbered walls. I lower myself onto the bench by the hearth's side, careful to keep the worn wood's grain from catching on my garments. The quiet crackle of the last glowing ember beneath the candle stirs once more, small sparks leaping upward before they dim. Against the hush, I can hear the gentle murmur of wax as it warms and shifts, the soft trickle within the taper where the flame's heat melts an inner well, feeding the wick with sustenance. A faint note of fragrance drifts across my face, beeswax, spent oak, ancient smoke, like a hymnal of the day repeated so often that its melody has become part of the house's bones. I close my eyes and breathe deeply. In the darkness beyond my lids, the flame's afterimage dances upon my eyelids, a slow swirl of gold and amber. I remember the forging of each candle, the selection of pure wax free from the smoky black of tallow's heavier heat, the cooling waters that sealed the layers, the measured count of pulses between dips, like a silent prayer recited with each layer. Even the smallest imperfection, the faint nick where trimming clipped a hair too deep, becomes part of a candle's story, a testament to the hands that formed it and the hearts that labored beside the hearth. In this moment of solitude, the candle's light feels like a living companion. It offers no judgments, raises no questions, and welcomes the slightest breeze as though it were a caress. It holds me in its orphaned glow until I must tear myself away and seek the soft rest of straw and wool beyond the hearth circle. And then, once eyelids grow heavy and breathing deepens, the candle will continue its vigil alone, its flame now solely my emissary against the dark. I rise at last, bending to whisper a word of thanks to the flame. My silhouette stretches tall along the brick hearth, and I pause for one last, reverent study of its wavering height. A breath, a nod, and I turn, stepping into the corridor's shadowed hush. The waxen fragrance and the soft heat trail after me like memories unwilling to fade. My footsteps pass beyond earshot, and the house lies utterly quiet, yet not quite dark. The taper's gentle glow remains, unwavering, as the guardian of the night. Here, in this candlelit solitude, I leave behind the weight of the day's toil. Tomorrow will come with its renewed heat and clatter of tools, its swishes and hisses and patient counts. But tonight, the hush is complete, carried on the back of a single flame. And as the final ember of that flame settles into its slow descent, I rest in the knowledge that light has been born anew from molten wax and water, from household hands and the warm pulse of a timeless ritual, until dawn once more bids me to the hearth.